This is down in New York, was more of a letdown. Yeah, think, no surprise here, folks, with city workers openly flouting the rules as enforcement agents turned a blind eye. They work in the same city. Everybody's in on it. Remember rule number one of this program. Our most disappointing bit of education since doing the news, it really is who you know. Okay, keep that in mind. Cops were expected to enforce new laws on Monday that explicitly prohibited city employees from parking in bike lanes, bus stops, crosswalks, or on sidewalks. But there was no sign of crackdown on Monday, with government employees' personal cars littering verboten spaces citywide and cops turning a blind eye. The sidewalks around Astoria's 114th precinct were filled with no less than 30 parked personal cars, only 11 of which had placards at all, and cops said they were unconcerned about the supposed crackdown. What we need is an almost separate force. Like maybe the state police ought to come down. Maybe this is Cuomo's opportunity to spank his rival, the mayor of New York City, and send the state police down. But I don't know enough about the law. But these people are going to keep getting away with it because these are the deals that they cut, just like the captains and the chiefs, the fire captains and the chiefs, allow these people to pad their pensions so that you can pay for them in perpetuity. Your taxes are never going to get better until you speak up. Will we ever? All right. This is a troubling story. It affects, it affects all of America, really. A team of lawyers filed a lawsuit Monday in federal court in Washington, D.C., seeking to establish the nation's capital as a venue for men across the U.S. to sue the Boy Scouts of America for allegedly failing to protect them from long ago sexual abuse at the heads of Scoutmasters. The 8 plaintiffs in the potentially groundbreaking lawsuit, identified as John Does 1 through 8, live in states where the statute of limitations would prevent them from suing, such as the law we have here in New York State. The plaintiffs' lawyers now contend, though, that federal court in Washington is an appropriate venue for such a lawsuit because the Boy Scouts were incorporated there in 1910 and obtained a congressional charter. These are just troubling stories because, unfortunately, but as had been predicted by experts, or at least pointed out by experts, and we kind of avoided this. You want to say, nah, but it's true. Just like what Willie Sutton said, I rob banks because that's where the money is. Well, pedophiles hound and haunt children in these organizations like the teachers, priesthoods, etc., because that's where the children are. It is 6:32. We need to take another look at the weather, and we will do that right now. And then we'll be back with sports and some national news commentary and your phone calls. Well, the big story today is the weather, or at least that component of the weather that's very cold. Right now it's 34. It's going to get up to 40 today, but high winds this afternoon. We will have some snow flurries that will go into the afternoon. We don't expect them to amount to much, but we're telling you there will be wind gusts up to 45 miles an hour. And tonight, as it gets cold, it'll get down to about 20, but with the wind chill, it'll be 10. 0 to 10 degrees is what it will feel like. More cold tomorrow, mixture of sun and clouds, but Friday begins to warm up, gets up to 47 degrees, cloudy again. But on Saturday, we didn't make this up, not me, 60 degrees. Get out the baseballs. Pitches and catches, well, they don't report until about 6 weeks from now. But maybe you want to throw the ball around with Junior if you bought baseballs and bats and stuff for the Christmas and Hanukkah rush. That is something that you may want to consider. The weather this morning is brought to you exclusively by United Hebrew of New Rochelle, voted one of America's best rehabilitation and senior care campuses, and it's right here in New Rochelle. Visit uhgc.com. And of course, the bottom of the hour is brought to you by Aging Issues Management, the law firm of Pena & Con, Dominic's Fine Cigars, and plug-in virtual reality. It is 6:34 as we get into the bottom of the hour. Some other stories we want to share with you, and then we'll get to sports. A lot going on in the sports world today. Former National Security Advisor John Bolton, who clashed with the Trump administration officials over withholding aid to the Ukraine, said Monday that he would testify at President Trump's impeachment if subpoenaed. And this is not sitting well, obviously, with the president or the Republican members of the Senate. Since my testimony is once again at issue, he said, and that is Bolton, I have had to resolve this serious competing issues as best I could based on careful consideration and study. I have concluded that, quote, if the Senate issues a subpoena for my testimony, I am prepared to testify, unquote. It takes a 51-vote majority now to issue subpoenas in the Senate, meaning 4 Republicans would have to defy the White House and party leadership. Now, here's the deal. And there's no sense calling me to argue it over a technicality that we don't have the proof. The proof is right here, if indeed he testifies as people expect him to. And so the real issue is, should he be removed from office? Now, the Republicans don't even want that, and it's part of their political strategy. They don't even want that testimony out there because then they won't have that last, quote, plausible denial issue. Meanwhile, the Democrats, knowing full well that the Senate's not going to convict the president if he should nuke Nanking, they want this information out there anyway because it's all about the election and it's all political. So that's the game that's going on. And now the way there's a lack of real formality to this impeachment. The rules get made up as they go along, and that's how the founding fathers wanted it. And right now, most of the cards are held by the Republicans. They have the votes. They can make up any set of rules, reasonable rules they want. In fact, today, Mr. McConnell announced, actually late yesterday, he's the majority leader, that they'll use the same set of rules that they used during the Clinton impeachment. What those are, we'll have to look into. But once again, the only leverage the Democrats have is to withhold filing the articles. They want witnesses. The president actually has said he wants witnesses, but the Republicans at large are telling him, no, you do not. You want this put before the Senate and quickly adjudicated. So that is where we are as we head into 6:37 on this Wednesday, January 8th. Some other information in the news this morning, and these summaries from the Wall Street Journal. U.S. forces and their Western allies in the Mideast took swift steps to bolster their defenses in the days before the retaliatory attack, so they're prepared for whatever might happen. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, made a rare trip to Syria and held talks with Assad, demonstrating the Russian leader's influence in the battle-scarred country. And that is pretty consistent with what our expert commentators have been telling us, that all of this turmoil in the Middle East is creating great opportunities for Russia and China to be the dominant players in that part of the world as our influence recedes. And many might say, and we're not saying that that's a good thing. Others say it's not. Depends on how you look at things. A Senate panel backed the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade deal despite some criticism that it lacks sufficient protections from U.S. companies. But nonetheless, this is the president's replacement for NAFTA, something that he's wanted to do since he came in office, and clearly has bipartisan support. Meanwhile, prosecutors asked the court for a sentence of up to 6 months in prison for former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, again, one of the people caught up in the president's, investigation of the president's campaigns, contacts with Russia during the 2016 election. In Venezuela, lawmakers rammed their way into Congress and passed lines of soldiers and swore in Guaido as head of the assembly yesterday, and that troubled locale. And Spain chose a socialist leader, that's interesting, as premier to lead the coalition government, ending a political deadlock. So that's where we are. And a lot of people are talking about it. We're not quite there yet. We want to do a little more research. But this guy, Gozin, who was a very interesting guy, Gozin's he used to run Mitsubishi. Then he later run, with great success, by the way, at least on the face of it, Nissan, which, by the way, makes incredible cars. They're as good as Toyotas now. You just can't beat them up. You can't kill them. Great cars. But He avoided so far, at least he's alleged to have been very corrupt and maybe even avoided paying taxes on $80 million of income. But he snuck out of, by all reports now, he snuck out of Japan where he was being held on sort of semi-house arrest. They had cameras all over his house. They didn't want him to leave the country. He had $15 million bail posted. And now he's back, I do believe in Lebanon, if I'm not mistaken, but that's almost secondary to the fact that he went to a country that does not have an extradition agreement with Japan. And how they got this guy out is interesting. He somehow invited a bunch of musicians over to his house. Again, he was in semi-house arrest. And one of the, if you've ever been at the airport or you look on stage, the next time you go to a concert, you'll see lots of big trunks. Well, evidently a tuba trunk or some such thing. They drilled holes in it. They put him in there. They put the trunk in a private plane. And he was out of there. I don't know. There's a part of me that so mistrusts corporations now that I'm glad he ripped them off. It has nothing to do with right or wrong. He shouldn't have done it. He'll go to jail when they catch him. But right now, I hope he keeps getting away with it because we're all on our own now. Government's not helping you. The president's not helping you. The Democrats are not helping you, although the Democrats, if they could, want to give everything away to their preferred clients. It's every man for himself in the new America. Really, honest to goodness, it is. Speaking of corporations and not being able to trust them, Boeing Company recommended extra flight simulator training for the 737 MAX pilots, a humbling and costly reversal of a long-standing design principle that helped the aircraft maker minimize the time and expense for airlines to start flying their jets. Boeing had steadfastly argued, even after 2 MAX crashes, that's the 737 MAX, that pilot training on personal computers or laptops alone was sufficient. Well, that all has to do with how you market a plane and you sell it at a reasonable price. It costs airlines a lot of money to train, blah, 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 blah. But once again, and why we always need regulations and why the FAA is finally cracking down on this otherwise great plane builder, that even the best plane builder on the planet tried to cut one corner and it resulted in people dying. Or at least those are the allegations, and they appear to be true. But there is no, it's hard to find the sweet spot. Do you make $1 billion and break the rules, or do you make $950 million and stay within the rules? I've always been an advocate, and most people I think who are sane and fair believe that you make the $950 million and you forego another $50 million in profit. But it's very hard to get people in an organization to think like that because that's not how they're compensated. And depending on how good their bosses are, people try to fit in. They try to get along to go along. Truth is not valued. Please, don't stand there or sit there or listen in your car and tell me it is. If you work for a corporation, you know that truth is not valued. And when it comes to teamwork, only the best run companies, and I don't know which ones are there anymore. I used to work for one, and then they went upside down and became one of the leaders, and it's all about me, technology, and ethics. That's Merrill Lynch, by the way. And before they were bought, I can't speak to what happened since Boney bought them. Bank of America, rather, bought them. But what you find in these companies, you talk about teamwork, the most avid, truculent, competitive, disingenuous people when it comes to teamwork are the people that run the place, because that's how they got there. And it's that second line. The first line, well, the guy's the top dog. He has to kiss the board's butt. They cut deals with boards that you would not believe, right out of Machiavelli's The Prince. But they get to do that. That's how they get to the top. But it's that second line, the business heads and the, if you will, the second in line. They talk about teamwork and they do everything to undermine one another in the fight for the top job. Anyway, look, it's reality. I shouldn't complain about it. Or should I? I don't know. It's the American way. It is 6:43. It is time to look at sports. So yesterday we do our sports broadcast, as we do each and every day. And then around 8 o'clock or so, Jake, our resident sports guy, comes in, and we're talking about who the possible Giant coaches are and talking about his picks of the week evolution as he cooks them up during the week to tell us what the best games to bet on over the weekend are. He does that on Fridays. And we leave thinking that this guy, Rule, is going to be the next coach. He walks out. He had a train to catch about right around 10 when we got off the air. Comes running back down here at the train station. Oh, my God, headlines. Rule signed with Carolina. And so today we find out this. Joe Judge is finalizing a deal to become the 19th head coach in the history of the New York Giants. A source confirmed to NorthJersey.com and USA Today in the Northeast. Judge, 38, interviewed for the position Monday on a day when many believed the coronation would happen for Matt Rule. It's one of Bill Belichick's trusted lieutenants who gets the job. He's special teams coordinator, and to correct myself, I said offensive coordinator. Joe Judge reacts on the sidelines in this picture that I'm looking at right here. See, wow, this came as a big shock. Now, what Giant fans should know is that it appears that Rule came in with this deal already. It's like $70 or $80 million over 8 years, something like that. $10 million contract a year or thereabouts. And that he simply called the Giants and he said, listen, before we do this, can you match this? And they said, no. And out he went. And as a Giant fan, and as a guy that loves John Mara, loved Eli Manning, this is the 2 o'clock. Is this 2 o'clock in the morning after all the handsome men and the pretty women were gone? And they just didn't organize right, or they got too drunk? Or did they have their eye on this pretty or handsome critter that was sitting over in the corner that nobody noticed? That's the real question, and it really is a good question. On the face of it, I understand this guy's a good coach, but on the face of it, it looks like they didn't do their homework, and hopefully all the great reporters out there who do sports, we don't get into it at that level of detail, they will get busy. All right, let's get to some other interesting things that happened in sports yesterday. This out of Rangerland. After years of waiting for Igor Shesterkin, who was welcomed to the chaos of Ranger hockey, the long-considered heir apparent to Henrik Lundqvist and the Broadway Nets allowed a goal in the first shot he faced in his NHL debut. He was a little nervous, a little shaky, and then another on the third, but his Rangers turned it on for themselves and their 24-year-old goalie, and they won 5-3. He definitely did settle down, and the coach laughed. He said, we definitely didn't hesitate to give him a taste of Rangers hockey, which means that we give up a lot of shots early in games, is essentially what he was saying. At any rate, of course, the goalies, plural, will be a huge part of the story for the Rangers, who are now 20-18-4 from here on out, as Lundqvist backed up in this one while Alex Georgiev was made a healthy scratch. Now, the Rangers felt they needed to call up Shesterkin after his dominant first half of season for the AHL Hartford Wolfpack as he adapted to North American hockey. Now, this is what he had to say. On my way to the arena, my hands were shaking and I couldn't even drink water, Shesterkin said through an interpreter, still a little unsure of his improved English under the bright lights. But as I stepped on the ice, I felt everyone's support and energy, and it really helped me. And he said, believe me, I can play better. He finished with 29 saves. Now, it still leaves the Rangers with the larger question. No team is reasonably successful with 3 goalies. Who goes? Georgiev? Does Shesterkin go back for another half season of salt and pepper seasoning? Do they trade Georgiev, or do they simply edge and slowly remove the icon of the team, the face of the squad, at least up until now, Henrik Lundqvist, because the real face of the Rangers is becoming Arturi Panarin, 3 more points last night, having a ridiculously successful season. Speaking of success, Anders Lee, the captain of the Islanders, 2 nights in a row, gets the winning goal. He celebrates an overtime winner last night, his second in as many nights. He gave the Rangers a 4-3, the Islanders a 4-3 win, and we can do 2 stories in one here, over the other local team, the New Jersey Devils, who've had a hard time getting out of their own way this year, playing a little better under their new coach. But the interesting thing is the coach that they fired only a week ago just got a job. Yesterday he signed with the Oh, Nashville Predators, who got rid of their coach. So good for him. That's only the Predators have been around like 30 years, but only their third coach. The current coach, and now we know why after seeing what he did in Washington and the Islanders. Their first coach in their existence, now the coach of the Islanders, was there for some 16 years. We turn our attention to baseball now. While Major League Baseball is finishing up its investigation of the Astros, they're saying that Carlos Beltran, and this is the fixes end, come on, appears more likely than not to avoid hard discipline and begin his new job. Discipline in the form of suspension appears quite possible for the leaders of the Astros championship club. That's because strong evidence has surfaced that they illegally stole opponents' signs via electronic means. Now, they're going to have to, that is Major League Baseball, get very transparency who else is involved. And again, Carlos Beltran, former Yankee, now in the Mets, in baseball land here in New York, he's going to get a pass. But one's gut says that with what his background is in terms of the team, he should be held more accountable. But he won't be, because sports is all about perception now, not reality. The Nets lost again. They have at least their seventh in a row, and without all their great players, it's understandable. They lost to the Thunder by a score of 111 to 103, and the New York Knicks got blown out yesterday out in L.A. Of course, LeBron James and the L.A. Lakers. No need to get into too much of the details. All righty, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll share some of the financial stories with you. We'll open up the phones, and we'll see what else is going on. You are listening to Radio Westchester here on or at the station, at the radio station. It is 34 degrees, going to get up to 40 today, but remember, the real issue later this morning won't be the snow flurries. It'll be the high winds, perhaps as high as 45 miles an hour. We have returned. Welcome back. It is, oh my goodness, it's, he's not calling already, is he? No, he doesn't call till later. I looked at one screen that I should not have. It is Wednesday, January 8th, 2020. Welcome to Mornings with Bob Marrone. I am Bob Marrone. This is Radio Westchester, the train station, or rather the radio station at the train station. We are on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Periscope. We're now on iTunes Radio as well, and we will soon be on Spotify. The primary ways people listen to us, particularly if you're getting ready to go in your car and you want to go on either to your auxiliary or your Bluetooth applications, go to MyTunerRadio.com and go to the Mornings with Bob Marrone app or Radio Westchester app, and there we are. Welcome to the program once again. Again, it's 34 degrees, getting up to 40 today. Partly sunny, turning windy with scattered snow showers through mid-morning. High winds. It will feel like 10 to 20 degrees out there today. 45 miles an hour is a lot of wind. If you have loose things in your house, if you still have Christmas decorations up in different places, secure them or perhaps even take them down if you can. Tonight, still windy, and the word the experts used was frigid. Lows around 20, wind chills 0 to 10. That's what it'll feel like. Thursday, well, that's tonight, or rather, Wednesday, more of the same. I'm sorry, today is Wednesday. I'll get better, trust me. Tonight, windy, frigid, lows around 20. Thursday, sunny, still cold, but highs getting up to 32. At night, things will not warm up, getting down to 27. But Friday, they will. It'll be cloudy on Friday, but the temperature will rise to 47. Now, get this, on Saturday, the temperature is going to rise to, oh my goodness, 60 degrees. Now, you know the way that is. We can always add a degree or two. The weather, again, brought to you exclusively by United Hebrew of New Rochelle, voted one of America's best rehabilitation and senior care campuses, and it's right here in New Rochelle. Visit uhdc.com. We're also brought to you at this coming top of the hour by Aging Issues Management, the law firm of Payne & Kahn, Dominic's Fine Cigars, and Plug-in Virtual Reality. Now, some financial news before we get into the top of the hour, though we have opened up the telephones, 914-222-3141, 914-222-3141. We do have some more local news for you, but first, finances. GM posted its biggest ever sales drop in China last year and warned of a tough 2020 amid headwinds in the world's largest auto market. Meanwhile, Tesla said it has begun preparing its new China factory to build a car maker's Model Y, a compact SUV. U.S. stocks retreated yesterday with the Dow Industrials and S&P 500 falling 0.4% and 0.3%, respectively. Facebook was in the news. It seems they're in the news every day. They're banning videos that have been manipulated using advanced tools, though it won't remove most doctored content. U.S. tariffs against China triggered a slide in imports in November, contributing to the smallest trade deficit in 3 years. Exports did rise. An ex-Goldman vice president pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit securities fraud in connection with an alleged insider trading ring. Those stories don't surprise you, do they? No, they don't surprise me either. Samsung expects a 34% drop in fourth quarter operating profit affected by a global slump in chip sales, not potato chips, because I would buy them if the price dropped of my beloved potato chip. Meanwhile, Goldman will release new details about how and where it makes money, hoping to win over skeptical investors. Well, how about that? And those are just some of the stories. Now, one that may hit home for you is the whole issue of student loans and now student loan bonds. Julie Chinaka is 50 years old and still owes $250,000, says a story in the Wall Street Journal. Still, $250,000 in student debt. She was happy to get a new payment plan that lowered her monthly bill, but the holders of the two bonds backed by her loans were probably less cheerful. The two bonds were due in 2043 and 2054, but Ms. Chinook and other borrowers were paying less each month under a new government plan that tied debt payments to income, something that Joe Soroselli's talked about on these microphones. Because borrowers were taking longer to pay off their loans, there was a risk the bonds backed by the loans wouldn't be paid off in time. Well, that is a problem. But you know what? That's a problem that they ought to be able to work out, and there ought to be more bonds put together to help people with this kind of crazy debt. And I tell you, this issue out in Australia is just incredibly dangerous. This 11 million acres on fire in that very large, modestly inhabiting country. Nonetheless, those are the stories, those are the things that are going on this Wednesday, January 8th, 2029. We do have some other stories, though, that have come in locally. Ed Day, the very good, and we say very good because of the way he handled the flu vaccine. His girlfriend's, his girlfriend has filed a defamation suit versus his daughter-in-law. As you know, there is an issue. I guess his marriage broke up. His son doesn't talk to him, who once ran for the Congress. And there's all kinds of stuff going back. But the story goes something like this, and it was in Aloha today. She says, that is the daughter-in-law of Mr. Day, has said that his girlfriend established a relationship with County Executive Day in order to steer contracts to her law practice. Donna Pascuti, an attorney in Westchester, accused Jennifer Day of making statements on Facebook in March that she knew to be false. And that's the classic malice that Mr. that Professor Breslin always talks about. So we shall see how that goes. And but I had another story that I did want to share with you according to this, and then I'm going to talk about the flu and why you're going to want to listen to our show Friday. Croton on Hudson, Route 9 reopened following a crash and a driver suffering serious injuries. That crash has been cleared up. So there we go. Come Friday, you'll want to listen to the morning show. I'm always interested, although troubled too, when someone I know and respect greatly, and I hope she's listening. I didn't get a chance to give her a buzz, but I will, and give her a heads up about what's coming Friday. But the publisher and editor of the Mount Vernon Post, a friend, brilliant woman in general, but she posted something, or at least passed on a post, that we need to call her out on. And yes, am I doing it so that you'll listen in on Friday? Yes, but intellectually I care a great deal about this. And that's what she does too, so we'll have kind of a friendly debate. She called the laws compelling people to vaccinate their children, or at least I'm paraphrasing now, I want to get this right, and referred to that as Nazism because you're forced to do it and you got to do what everyone else does. Well, I have to respectfully and assiduously disagree with my colleague. The science must rule all. And if even liberals who care about such things and care about this kind of free thought and free expression of ideas realize that the science of herd immunity is at work here, and we need to vaccinate our children for the public good. But I'm going to leave open the possibility that you'll say something that may cause me to question it. But I want you to understand my own history with this. I was not particularly involved in this issue until I started the radio, or actually broadcasting back in the early part of the century. And one of the first stories, I think it was the first story I ever covered, was a fundraiser for autistic children. And I learned two things then, maybe three. One is, and to their credit, the people with autistic children were extremely motivated to help and raise questions and raise money and bring in experts. They were also very interested in, and again, because of the costs of educating the children on the so-called spectrum. They were very involved in making sure that things that were included within that spectrum were covered by insurances and different grants and such to help their children. They did it well. In fact, they did it now to such a great degree that there are some people who are questionably, at least in my view, on the spectrum that are included. Well, all's well ends well. If that helps them pay for dealing with this issue and getting the proper education, no harm can come of that. So I learned that they were well motivated and used the law well. The other thing I realized, and unless you've had a seriously autistic child, you can't appreciate it. And I say this with love and peace, but I also say this as well. They are among the most frustrated people you will ever meet, looking for answers that don't come easy. And it's understandable when you love someone and it's your child and their future may well be compromised and they don't behave well and it's difficult to get them to behave and they can't communicate and you love them. So their frustration level is high. Well, the combination of all those things leads to the third item, which is the search for answers. Why does this happen? Is it a genetic thing? Is it the environment? Is it flu or vaccines? Or I shouldn't say flu, but is it the vaccination of our children? And like most things that psychologists will tell you, when people don't have an answer to something that grates on them, they fill it in. Mankind has filled, not that there's no God, this is not an atheist creed, but they filled in the biggest doubt in the world with religion. people on both sides of the political spectrum will go to conspiracy theories to answer the questions, such as we have with Kennedy. And I'm one of them. I think Oswald shot him alone, but I don't think he acted alone. But that's just me filling a void about something I have no answer for. And this has gone on and on throughout history. You take a class and they'll tell you, they put up a pie chart up on the board or on a screen now and show you how people will inject their own answers to complex questions in the void. And so that is what we do. In fact, we saw it yesterday because of the coincidence with the Mr. Bolton, the former National Security Advisor, who wanted to take out Soleimani for years and advised this president and many others to be much more vigilant and violent even with Iran. On one day, he says that he's going to testify in the impeachment trial, and then the next day, the president does something that Mr. Bolton wanted. Now, do I think they're tied together? Honestly, I don't. But there are people that believe it. Similarly, and I tried to wring this out of people yesterday, there are people that believe that the Clintons killed Vince Foster, that the Clintons ran all kinds of child sex rings out of a pizzeria in Virginia. And that says more about the stupidity of us than it does. But nonetheless, conspiracy theories. And so, this is where we're sort of a convergence of things we talk about here and things that we care about, and particularly, and this is personal. And I don't know that I said enough about it 2 weeks ago. And it even helps me, because many people will say, you let your callers take fair number of liberties with you. And I do. And that you, no matter how harsh they are, you retain warmth for them. Yes, I do. And it's vice versa. And it goes back to why I was so touched by the death of Don Imus. And this does relate to the flu thing, so please be patient with me. One of the things about morning radio, both doing it and listening to it, is I started listening to Imus. He says it's almost hard for me to remember the date. Not when he was a music DJ and totally over the top. I didn't, only because I was listening to music and God knows what else I was doing. But one day, I guess in the late 70s, early 80s, and it was after he came back from Cleveland the first time, I started listening to Imus. And I listened to that show every morning for 25 years, 20 years. And I only stopped in 2007 when I got a morning show of my own. And why I respect the callers so much, whether they agree with me or not, is when you listen to a show every single day, and it's the first thing that you do in the morning, it becomes very personal, and you care about the issues. And I loved, and I was shocked at Raisman's commentary about Imus. Totally, Raisman is a great, I read him every week. He's a great media commentator. And when he calls out the people in the sports world, he knows what he really does. He's one of the best, but can't agree with everybody all the time. But his comments I thought about Imus, which were very harsh, it made me realize that some people just don't have a sense of humor and don't understand irony, and perhaps that's his issue. But he equated Imus. Now, Imus did some things that were wrong. Clearly, what he did with the basketball and the reference to African-American women was wrong. He's since apologized 1,000 times. He did in one of the last interviews he did. So I'm not saying he's perfect, but he certainly screwed up. He was wrong-headed when he gave that speech to the National Press Club when the Clintons were president. However, when the Clintons were in office, but that was a Freudian slip, huh? But here's my point, and it's long-winded, I know, but it's important, and it goes to this whole thing with flu vaccines, or not with vaccines in general. Imus, in what he was doing, he becomes personal. I love the humor. I love the feel of the guests. I loved his intellect. I loved the paradox. Didn't agree with everything, but he got it. He got irony. He got zeitgeist. Most of his humor was about not what he necessarily would believe, but what the general sensibility was, even in the mistakes that he made. One day, and it was after he got married, and his wife is very green conscious. And this woman made a huge improvement in his life after he got sober, and, he had another child and adopted a child and put money into cancer research and sudden infant death syndrome. And everything you've ever read about Imus is true. If he talked about a product, I probably bought it. And then one day, he starts using all this influence and all this gravitas talking about vaccines. And by then he was a big political player, and he started getting all these giants of the political world to start looking into the vaccines. And the reason I tie all this together, A, loved Imus and took it personal when he died, because you listen to somebody every morning, it becomes a part of your life. But I was always disappointed that he allowed his wife to drag him into this controversy, and he wound up looking very silly. But such is sincerity. There's nothing more embarrassing than being sincerely wrong. But nonetheless, so here we have it again. Someone I respect a great deal is calling the laws about, if I'm understanding it right, about vaccinating your children, calling those laws Nazi-like. Well, here's the issue in a society, and again, the paradox is this tends to come from the left, which is mystifying to me, because we in the left do agree, and when I say moderately left in my case, don't ask me about schools because I'm to the right of Attila the Hun, but we in the left value social responsibility, taking care of those less fortunate, worrying about the environment, having freedom of speech, although that's leaving the left in droves, particularly on college campuses, and all those kinds of things. But again, the point I'm making here is we've always valued the social good. And what I find about this whole vaccine thing is that it violates that tenet. It's people on the left want their freedom to let their kids infect other children. Well, you can't have it. Science matters. And I'm always on the lookout. You'll notice it when I talk to my friend, and she's Janelle Albritton, when I talk with her and I talk with other people. And I have this other little, it's not a hidden agenda. It should be out there in my tone. But whenever a publicist calls me and they want to get someone on and talk about wellness, or they want to get someone on talk about crystals or magnets or the hereafter or, heaven forbid, astrology, I can't wait to get them on, because underlying is a coiled snake inside me looking to politely but nonetheless rebuke the silliness. Now, every once in a while, these things are right, so you got to keep an open mind. I'll keep an open mind for my friend Janelle. I'll keep an open mind, as I did for Imus for a while, until it became an embarrassment. He wanted senators to hold hearings. But folks, please, all these supplements, these things that get rid of your wrinkles, the fact that you can talk with the hereafter, alchemy, etc., and quite frankly, even certain elements of religion, just be careful. Anywho, I know I went on a long riff because it has a lot to do with morning radio. It has a lot to do with that even people we like take positions that we have to disagree with. And in fact, I'm sure Vince Russo's listening, and he'll be joining us soon. He's going to be upset because he found God. And I say that almost tongue-in-cheek. Finding God is a good thing, or at least finding the spiritual element in all of that. But then you get to the more, what did my mother used to say, supercilious aspects of that, of believing in things that science says are not possible. So I see we got a phone call, and somehow I missed it, and that's my apologies. And I'm going to call that person right back just to show you. I did not have my light on, so we're going to call that person now. We said we opened the phones, 914-222-3141. I was waxing about
Hello.
this. Good morning. You're on Radio Westchester. Sorry for the delay.
Good morning.
What's up?
I just called to thank you for being very consistent. Yesterday was Red Meat Tuesday, and you certainly served up a lot, both to Triple Bogey and
Yes,
Harlan.
I also served up a lot of red meat to my friend Mike Duffy as well. It depends on the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that was consistent with the two that I mentioned was that you criticized people like myself who say that it's hypocrisy for the Dems to do what they're doing against the president and we use examples with President Obama or with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and you kind of like poo-poo it.
Well, I poo-poo it
So
only because...
what I'd like
Yeah,
to
go
know,
ahead.
Bob, and let's take the politics out of it, Bob.
Sure.
Let's talk about you and me and everybody and just the way the world works.
Go ahead.
What's wrong with pointing out the hypocrisy of someone who sets a precedent and then flip-flops on it, much like the Dems did with the nuclear option? They loved it when they were in power, and once it was used against them. What are you doing? That's unconstitutional. You can't do that. Well, guess what? You made the law. You made the rule. Now you have to live by it.
Okay, I will answer your question. Yes, it's hypocrisy. And if it comes under the header of hypocrisy, and that's what we're talking about, I have no problem with that. I'm a hypocrite myself, as we all are sometimes. But what I find when we're talking about what someone did today and whether or not it really happened, I'd like to just stick with that for a moment rather than always go back to something we did 10 years ago or 10 or 15 years ago. I agree, and maybe I don't say it enough, with the hypocrisy of it, okay? Like I just called out the Democrats for saying Bolton, that Soleimani being killed was a result of what Bolton said. It's nonsense. All I'm suggesting, and I hear your point, all I'm suggesting is that we at least stick with the matter at hand before we get into the hypocrisies. Now, people come in right away. Well, 10 years ago, I've tried to avoid calling out Bush, other than the fact that he made a mistake. Bush was a decent human being. And so, yes, I hear your point, but that's why I do it, to answer your question.
Bob, you and I are within 5 years of each other age-wise, okay?
That close?
Yeah.
I mean, you're not
Yeah.
older yet?
No, you're going to hit the magic number in the same month that I'm going to hit the upstate speed limit.
Go ahead. See, this is what I was just talking about, folks. I love this SOB, but what a pain in the ass. Go ahead.
Can you tell me in our lifetimes, or can you name presidents that were qualified for the position?
Yes, one.
How many?
Two.
Out of the 45,
Three.
how many do you think were actually qualified?
Three.
Okay, and that's my point.
No, but let me tell you who, just so we can expand the conversation, because I love this. I thought, believe it or not, Richard Nixon was qualified, but then he got a little wacky. I thought that George H.W. Bush was qualified, and I thought that and I know I'm dating myself further, I thought that the President Eisenhower was qualified.
Okay, so basically what you're saying in recent history, there haven't been.
That's correct.
Okay, so my point is this. Everybody, he's not qualified. He's this and he's that. You know what? All the people that weren't qualified before him were politicians, and they got us where we were before he was elected, and nobody liked it. Okay? He knew how to work this. He's a businessman, so he worked the system. When I say the system, I'm talking about the Electoral College, okay? Because that's what he needed to get elected. Politicians think they're going to run around and get the popular vote means nothing. It may mean something to get them elected locally, but when it comes to running for the presidency of the United States, it means diddly.
That's very true.
So he outwitted a long-time politician who had risen almost to the highest ranks possible and was, quote, a shoo-in by every poll, every commentator, every whatever, okay? And meanwhile, the people that supported the president just sat back, and when it came time to go vote, they did. And lo and behold, somebody, the other candidate, got an enema.
No,
And so,
it's a way to put it, but continue, please.
okay, so this is my point. My point is the country, and you can't say as a whole, but you know what? If you take California and New York out of the popular vote, it's a race.
No, it is, and you know one of the interesting things, Anthony, and I wrestle with this every day. if one could call me, well, I would say a hypocrite, but some of the paradoxes I'm aware in my own commentary is I rail against the very things that Trump supporters railed against that got him elected. And I realize I'm aware of that hypocrisy. I mean, lately you just can't get a true word out of an elected official anymore. I mean, look at what the far left is doing to New York State. Look what they're doing to our schools. So I hear you, but I do,
Look what
and I
they've
don't even
done
have an
to
answer.
something as sacred as the judicial system with this no bail.
Yeah, no kidding. I want to whack my head against the wall until it raises lumps. So.
And as one of your other callers used to tell you, you can your daughter can go to the nurse and have a pregnancy or think she's pregnant, and they don't have to inform you as a parent.
I agree with that too. So I don't know. I appreciate this call and it keeps me on the straight and narrow. But man, we live in troubled times.
I don't know whether there is a game plan in the Middle East. If they've done the trying to figure out the chess moves 2 or 3 moves forward. That I don't know. But I'll tell you one thing: they kept poking and poking.
Yeah, I know.
Poking, and the bear swung back.
I mentioned one of my own hypocrisies. Funny you should bring that up yesterday. You may remember because you're.
Well, let me say this, Bob, because I don't want people to think that I'm calling you out for being.
Oh, I understand that. Come on.
We, and I say we, the human race, we are all hypocrites because it's part of the human culture.
No, but Anthony, no, I don't see that at all. In fact, I always use when people say, "Well, we can't talk with them." You and I can talk every day and disagree, or almost every other day. And unless we start doing that more in this country, we're not heading anywhere. Because I'm not always right. You're not always right. In fact, I'm right more than you are. That was a joke. But we need more of this, and not.
Everybody knew that was a joke.
No, I know. But but I know my own hypocrisies. Well, we don't know all of them that we have, but I wrestle with that. I wrestle with it every day because.
All I'm saying is people need to take a deep breath and just relax for a little bit each day. Turn the TV off. Turn the radio off at some point during the day, and just clear your head. Try to come back to center, because it is what it is. There is no way that there can be any middle ground in today's politics. It's just unfortunate,
and it's unfortunate.
But that is the way it is.
But I thought of something. I think I mentioned it yesterday. Remember, I used to have Katie McFarlane on regularly, whom I adored, and I once said to her, I was so angry at the Iranians. I said, I could see me running through the streets of Tehran with an M16. I thought about that yesterday. I was saying, my God.
You wouldn't last long, that's for sure.
No, I don't think I'd be very good at it. Anthony, thank you very much. Well done.
You got it.
Thank you, sir. Take care. That's Anthony. Now, Vince is probably, I don't know if he got up yet, but let's take a look at the lineup. It is 7:22. You're listening to Radio Westchester here, the radio station at the train station. Vince Russo's coming up. He's either late or he's waiting for me to call him back. No, there he is. I see. He's a pain in the butt. And then up next, something we are starting off the new year with, we're going to talk with the Chief Executive Officer, the Executive Director of Choice, and we will be doing and featuring things that they do regularly. Those of you who live in New Rochelle know they have an outlet right here in town. They started out in New Rochelle with a small number of people, and now they're here in New Rochelle, White Plains, Peekskill, helping the homeless and the mentally ill get off the street. We're going to talk with Guy Fessenden. And then at 8 o'clock, we're going to talk with Dr. Deepak Bhatt about interventional cardiac care, a new drug that's out, but also we're going to ask him about so-called non-invasive ways. It's one of the areas, for all the things they do in medicine, for all the things they've succeeded, we still have way too many people get up in the morning and drop dead of a heart attack for lack of having had an angiogram. And for all the money we spend, we're still in the dark ages when it comes to predicting heart attacks, at least in my view. So we will hold a good doctor not accountable, but to answer those questions. And he's from Brigham and Women's Hospital, also Harvard Medical School. Al Tarantino joins us at 8:20. A.J. Woodson at 8:35. Black Westchester Magazine, and Harlan Ullman to add still more texture to what we're doing. Now, this is interesting that Russo has not called. Oh, no, there he is. Oh, he's going to be moaning and screaming. Mr. Religious himself. Let's see if we can get him on the phone. All righty. No, he's unavailable. What do you mean you're unavailable? Yeah, there he is. He's not unavailable. He's available, all right. He's available to every floozy in New Jersey. Why did I say that? Anyway, please welcome, without further ado, Vince Russo. Good morning, Vince.
Good morning, Bob. I called. You didn't pick up.
No, I had another caller on, and I was busy. I didn't see the light.
No, I called after the other caller.
Oh, would you? I saw that. You're all in cantankerous moods today. Don't I look pretty? I dressed up today. I got to go see some clients and beg them for money. So.
Yeah, I see you got on your blazer.
I got my blazer. I do have a blazer on. You know what's been cool about this? Since I'm not under any other radio stations, and this is not a criticism, I always thought that having a dress code was a good thing. But since I'm not under any dress code, see, I can do that thing like they do in you don't know if I'm wearing anything under my waist, do you? Now that I'm on TV, or sort of, all I have to do is have a nice top.
That is an image that cannot be unseen.
Well, actually, if I was, it would be seen. It would be hard to hide. And, did I know? I'm saying it would be hard to hide if I was naked. I was not insinuating anything else. I was not implying, sir, what you were not inferring. Anyway, so you may have heard, I probably went on too long because I combined too many things, but what I was talking about was the intimacy of morning radio, and then how someone that I viewed as an icon, it broke my heart. I'm still troubled with I'm Starring. It's almost like I can't believe that someone I shared every morning with for 25 years is gone. But also, one of his biggest errors was getting senators to go on the floor of the Senate and yell about vaccines. He wound up making a fool of himself. And I don't get it. I mean, this really good friend of mine is calling it Nazism. But I don't get, and these are the people on the far left that, generally speaking, went to school. So I don't know what, the far left has its own little wackadoodles,
Well, it doesn't make sense because the science shows us that vaccines are effective, and we've wiped out most of the communicable diseases that we had when we were when we were children.
Hey, it's President Bush's with us when we were childs.
It's they were bigly when we.
Excuse me, I got to do a little housekeeping. You should take the seat of honor right here. So I'm just doing housekeeping. Jake is in the house, ready with his picks. Yesterday, by the way, Jake, we outed you on the air today as running down the street here in the middle of the train station. Oh, my God, he went to Carolina. Oh, my God, he's gone. So we'll be talking with Jake a little later about the pick of that coach. I think the Giants can't find their butt with either hand. Anyway, so continue. I'm sorry, Vince.
Well, I was saying the science shows that it's effective. But, people, like you said, are looking for answers to questions that are, at this point, unanswerable. But, what it really comes down to is, they say, well, we have the freedom to decide for our kids. Well, every freedom, no matter what it is limited by how it affects other people. So, you have freedom of speech, but you can't go on the radio and say we should kill every whatever group you want to pick. If you have freedom in the Second Amendment to own firearms, you can't just go indiscriminately shooting people. Things like that. So freedom ends when it affects other people. And in this case, if you're going to send your child to school, you cannot put the other kids at risk because you don't think that something makes any sense.
There's this, I got to do a little more research on this. It's like, there are people who want Latin to come back to the Mass because it increases their ability to believe in hocus pocus. In other words, if it sounds exotic and arcane, there must be something to it. In many ways, for some people, the greatest sin in the world is knowledge because it takes away from hope for some folks. It really does. Knowledge takes away hope. See, if you don't know, you could say, maybe there really is a Santa Claus, or like this woman who managed her kids next door to me by telling them there was a boogeyman that was going to get them. How close is that to religion, by the way?
Well, speaking of boogeymen, I was reading an article just before we got on the air about how Iran has launched a couple missiles at a military base of ours in Iraq. And, it was interesting because I was thinking the other day how we've put the Iranian government in an untenable position.
Yeah, we have.
By whacking this general.
Whacking.
Because they know that they can't defeat us in a war. I mean, it's ridiculous. If they really push this thing to the extremes, they're going to get utterly destroyed. But they have to placate the mobs who are out there who are stampeding each other.
They got to bomb something where they don't do too much damage, but show they did it. Because one of the failures of diplomacy is to understand that you don't humiliate sovereign governments. They'd rather, and it's a sticky wicket. But that has never worked for the tattooed, beer drinking, testicles in the back of their car, gun stickers crowd, as you used to say. No crowd. That says, we're gonna make a parking lot out of Tehran. These are human beings.
Well, I think that what they did was make an effort, I thought, in this thing to placate the masses and not get themselves into such hot water that they're going to be utterly destroyed. Because I think one of the things that they really have to fear with Trump is that he's going to level downtown Tehran. If they push this thing, he's not going to have any kind of restraint whatsoever.
You know what? He can't do that, though. Even he knows he can't do that, because as much as there was a time I wanted to level downtown Tehran, the more that I've learned in the last 40 years, we need to level downtown Saudi Arabia. Those are the real bad guys in the region. The Iranians have done a lot of bad things, and what they did in '79 had me crazy. But they are 10 times better people and more free people than the Sunnis and the people on that massive desert known as Saudi Arabia.
Well, that's true, but I don't think that comes into it, because the president also has to placate the masses
and defend Americans. Absolutely,
the people in Tehran have to do it.
Yep.
So I think with what they did this time. If we just kind of shrug it off and say, okay, well, they did it. Now, I mean, if they escalate it, if they're really doing stuff, harmful to Americans and kill Americans, I mean, then we do have to respond. But I don't think that they're crazy enough to do that, because they know it's unwinnable.
Yes, but here's what the president, when I say the president and his advisors have to consider. This was, and that's why I haven't totally decried what the president did. Now, history tells us that this president doesn't think things out. But history also tells us that even though the other guy was a nicer man, he's brighter than George Bush, which so are certain fetuses. But having said that, if you're going to take such a bold step as the president has done, a learned, and I'm going to say administration, has to give the other guy a way out.
Yes, I agree. And this is what they have right now. They've launched a couple of missiles. It didn't hurt anybody. We actually shot a couple of them down. And this should be the way out. Now, whether he's going to let them out on this or not, I'm not sure. The position, though, that I think with some of our advisors I take issue with is they said, oh, my God, they took this guy out, and now it's going to release all of this terror all over the United States and blah, blah, blah. They said the same thing about bin Laden. And you know what? That fizzled out 2 weeks after bin Laden was dead.
Well, they didn't really kill bin Laden, Did you know that? They really didn't kill bin Laden because he can't possibly be dead because a black man ordered it.
Yeah, well,
he can't possibly be. It was somehow. The brown man in the White House thinks he did it, but he really didn't do it. It was the tattooed bunch with the pickup trucks that did it.
Well,
hey, we're America, man. We kill people. And see, that's what I worry about. That the president will listen to the yahoos that think that we're going to just force people. That was a divided country. There were last week. 2 weeks ago, there were protests, and now we've unified that country. And I'm having a little bit of tongue-in-cheek with the Saudis, but this can get to the point where the whole Middle East is a hornet's nest, Vince. So,
well, it is. It has been and always will be. and the Iraqis are saying, "Oh, we want you out now." Well, you know what? Let's pull everybody out. Let them all go to hell. Who cares? I mean, we've been in that country. The Iraqis have never ever supported us. We went in there and we took out Saddam Hussein. I think under the mistaken impression it was going to be like when we liberated Paris. Everybody was going to love us. And from that day forward, they've hated us over there.
Since Mossadegh,
And-
they've hated us. But you know what? They're supposedly on our side now, if you believe that.
They're not on our side. They
No,
never have been on our side. They're
I-
on their own side.
I
All they want to
understand.
do, all they want to do is get American money, and they don't give a darn about anything else. All it is business about, how we're training their guys to. Those guys wouldn't help themselves if Allah come down.
All
and
right,
told
come
them
on.
to do
Come on.
it.
Now, you are, as a religious man, and since your recent conversion, be very careful about castigating supernatural
I-
beings. My supernatural being is the flying spaghetti monster.
I am not conjugating anybody.
All right, listen, thank you so much. We'll talk to you again tomorrow, maybe later today. Vince Russo, everybody, we're going to do a quick review of the
Later,
weather,
Bob.
and we'll be back in a moment with a special guest, and we're glad to have Guy Fessenden from Choice. But first, it's time for the weather. The weather's brought to you exclusively by United Hebrew of New Rochelle, voted one of America's best rehabilitation and senior care campuses, and it's right here in New Rochelle. Visit Wait, I better do this right. UHGC.com. I'm looking at a tired face, but we'll get to him in a moment. Right now, it will be partly sunny. It's 34, going to get up to 40. Partly sunny today. But scattered snow showers leading into the afternoon. But here's the real deal. If you didn't take down fat Santa in front of the house or reindeer, whatever, we're talking about wind gusts today up to 45. So be aware that could be a problem. Tonight, windy, frigid. I've known too many who were frigid. At any rate, frigid, lows around 20. The wind chill will feel like 0 to 10 miles an hour. Thursday, sunny, cold again, highs around 32. 27 tomorrow night. Now get this, Friday, things been in the heat up. You can get a bathing suit out, it'll be up to 47. And you could leave it on for Saturday, Guy Fessenden. 60 degrees Saturday, but it will be cloudy. It's going to be hot and muggy, tropical weather. All right, as we head into the bottom of the hour, we have a special guest with us. Remember, we're brought to you by the United Hebrew of New Rochelle, a top-rated campus of senior care. Visit uhgc.com. Aging Issues Management, Aging Issues Radio, one of their shows tonight at 6 here on Radio Westchester. The law firm of Payne & Kahn, Dominic's Fine Cigars, and Plug-in Virtual Reality. I'm Bob Marrone. You're listening to Mornings with Bob Marrone here on Radio Westchester, the radio station at the train station. Remember, you can go to MyTuner Radio. You can also go to our app, radiowestchester.com. You can go to Mornings with Bob Marrone. Either way, you can listen on your phone. You can put it on Bluetooth. You're watching, as some of you right now, on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Periscope, and we're also on iTunes and soon to be on Spotify, and soon we will be everywhere. And if you're listening on this space shuttle, we're that little radio station that's all lit up in the train station here in New Rochelle. And we go to our next guest. Now, full disclosure, I'm on their board, but the issue becomes, why did I join their board and the board of choice? We talk often on this program, as do many other programs, and the press is filled with stories about the homeless and dealing with them and dealing with mental illness. And my next guest is a reminder that there are A, people, and B, institutions that work very hard to deal with the problem. And I first met this man, now 10 years ago at my old station, when it was he and about 5 or 6 others that were trying to help the homeless. And now he is the executive director of an organization that helps literally thousands. They have a presence here in New Rochelle, down at the tip of North Avenue. They have their headquarters now also in White Plains. They have an office, and they're helping people up in Peekskill. Excuse me, where that came from. Please welcome guy. And one of the reasons I joined is I care a lot about that stuff for all kinds of reasons that those of you who listen to this program know, particularly the aspect of it that involves mental illness. And I think Jake is about to die any minute. So let's go to Guy Fessenden. Welcome to the program, Guy.
Good morning, Bob. Thank you.
It's good to see. What do you think of our new revised studio? Did you ever see so many computers?
I think you could do all kinds of things here. Shoot down missiles coming in from foreign airspace, launch the shuttle. I also have to make note that when I came in, you had a giant vat of Monster energy drink, and now you've switched over to high-octane coffee.
Well,
How
it's
does your
one of-
heart not explode?
Because
You don't have one.
Oh, right in with the insults. No walking in the bullpen. By the way, you'll appreciate the man to your right, Jake Schaefer, has just finished 15 years as a traveling comedian. You guys want to
Wow.
exchange
Cool, man.
information. And what his hobby, Jake, is stand-up. So you guys have something in common. But at any rate, you're here because of what you do. And first of all, I'd like to give people the thumbnail, people who are new to what you do and how it started and how it works. And then talk a little bit about even some of the issues you run into, which involves turnover of case managers and et cetera, et cetera. But first, explain to people what Choice does.
We are a local agency that deals throughout Westchester with people who have some mental or physical limitation that prevents them from being able to secure the services that they need and in some cases are entitled to. We generally meet people at some state of homelessness, and we help them through getting to a place of safety, being able to get a predictable income through benefits, food stamps, about 35 other services that would include legal representation, addressing medical issues, all the types of things that each and every person needs in order to be able to have as full a life as they can. Remember when we were in school, we had Maslow's hierarchy.
I know
Right?
it well.
And you started with food and shelter, and then you moved up to level 5, which was self-actualization.
Yes.
But what happened if Maslow got it wrong? What if there was no level 1? What if we started at level 0, where you had no food and shelter, and you couldn't even think about self-actualization because you're shivering on the street somewhere
yeah.
with no food for 2 or 3 days at a time? That's where we meet people, and then we help move them as much as we can with their help through a continuum of services that helps them to be able to get stable housing, predictable income, and as happy a life as possible, which is good for everybody.
It is good for everybody, and people certainly complain about it, whether it's businesses, whether it's blight, whether it is empathy for those less fortunate. Now, the question arises, do they come to you? Do institutions, either people that incarcerate or doctors or medical institutions send you folks, or do you literally go to the street and interact with people who are homeless? How does it work?
We have a combination of proactive and reactive. Anybody who comes to us, regardless of their situation or their financial capabilities or
Wherewithal.
lack of capabilities, we will help. So the reactive part is somebody walks into our office and says, I need help, we help. But we also have a proactive group of people who go out into the street and find individuals who may not be aware of our service and help to educate them about what we do and invite them to try our services. We are embedded in the Westchester County Jail so that we can help people as they go through a period of incarceration to be able to say, what is it that I could do differently in order to not come back here? Because the average person that we deal with in the jail is 23 years old and on their 5th incarceration.
23 and on their 5th.
Yeah, because when you get released from jail, you're released with your release papers, your script, because in general, people from jail, 70% of people in jail have at least 2 mental illnesses that require a diagnosis and prescriptions, and a Metro card. So you have no money, you have no capabilities other than to go back to what you know, and what you know is what got you into jail. So how do you break the cycle? And nobody has an incentive to break the cycle. It's like going to a Marriott manager and saying, do you want repeat guests? Well, of course I do. It keeps the place full. It keeps my job. So what we try and do is intercept people while they're in jail and help them to think about where else could I live, what else could I do differently, incent them with ways to be able to think differently, with more motivation to do things differently and get a second shot.
What percentage of the people you help are or fit that description where they've been in jail, they're 23, 5 in car,
70%.
70%.
Yeah. 70% of people have some type of criminal background.
Okay, now if I were right now to walk over to Oasis, you know where it is, and didn't make the left to go down to one of your shops, and the homeless people were coming out, would that number probably apply to everybody
Sure.
there as well?
Well, what happens is people take prescription drugs in order to be able to address their diagnosis. Let's say it's schizophrenia. And the drug options that they have such dramatic side effects that once you start to feel better from the primary purpose of the
Yeah.
drug, you don't want to take it anymore because of how significant the side
tell
effects
people
are.
some of the side effects. Some of them are they make you almost sedentary and sluggish. Another one is I've read bilateral foot drop and it's certain tremors. What other types of side effects?
You're a zombie. You know, it's like when you take an aspirin for a pain in your arm. The aspirin doesn't know to go to your arm.
Right,
It
it's the whole
brings
body.
down
Right,
the
of
pain
course.
level across your whole body. Well, we don't know that much about the brain. So the best thing that modern science can come up with is come up with a drug that just totally numbs everything throughout the whole body in a remarkably dramatic effect.
Although, you know, for those of us, and you know my background, who have had what doctors would describe as severe agitated symptoms, you'll take anything.
It has nothing to do with the monster and,
Right.
the coffee.
No, at this point, no. But I just take it in lieu of coffee. So believe me, after this, I stop. But
Right.
yes, no, I'm talking about the severe agitation and the speed of your brain won't
Yeah.
stop, and the obsessions and all of that. They work, but what you're saying is it's the aftermath.
Yeah.
So they get off it and they're back on the street. Okay.
But when they're on the street, they become symptomatic again. They don't want to go back onto the drug because of the side effects, so they start to self-medicate. Self-medicate tends to be drugs. Now, I've got a drug requirement in order to be able to feel better because I'm self-medicating, and I have no ability to be able to pay for the drugs. So I have to turn to crime. But I'm not good at crime. So I get arrested. And then I get out, and I'm back into that cycle. I need drugs, I need crime in order to be able to secure the drugs. I'm back in jail. And it's just an endless loop.
Now-
Unless somebody steps in the middle and says, enough already.
Okay, choice steps in. And I know in all such endeavors, there's a lot of recidivism. It's the nature of what you do. But what are the chances that the person you grab is not going to go back to jail?
Probably about 1 in 5
Okay.
will not go back that would have otherwise.
Okay.
And the key is you got to live somewhere else. You have to go from living in Yonkers to living in Peekskill and get a fresh start. But nobody can do that by themselves. So we'll help somebody to say, you want to rethink this? You really want a second chance? Let's go somewhere else. Let's find you a good place to live. Let's get you the right kinds of supports. Let's get you with doctors and DSS and regular income from a predictable check and give you a real shot with support. Now keep in mind, 80% of the folks that we deal with have had families that have given up on them. They're by
course.
themselves.
Yeah.
That's an enormous consideration. That's a huge variable because once you are at the bottom and you've been cut loose and you're all by yourself, you can look up and up and up and still not see the bottom.
That mountain, that mountain is just
It's insurmountable.
huge.
You need somebody
My guest is Guy Fessenden. He's the executive director of Choice. You know their facility here in New Rochelle. They have a main office in White Plains, another outlet in Peekskill. A little bit about history. When you started, you had like a handful of people.
Yeah, we were we were providing services for about 120 people a month,
Right.
and that was great.
And how big was your staff?
The staff was 11.
Oh, 11. I was close.
Yeah, and then with Medicaid reform, they came back to all agencies and said, "I got good news and bad news. there had been capitation on the number of people that we could see. We were limited in the number of people that we could see. He said, I got good news and bad news. The bad news is we're cutting your rates by 40%. The good news is you can see as many people as you want.
Okay.
So we tend, as an organization, to embrace change and go run towards the fire. You know, the firemen and the policemen are so unique because they run towards danger when the natural inclination is to run away from it. So we ran towards that invitation. We figured out a business model that made economic sense. And we were able to grow from 120 people per month in our census to about 2,400 today.
Today. Now, how many, you have 3 or 4, how many outlets right now?
3,
3. How big is your staff?
114.
Okay, without getting into, because we'll be doing this, this is going to become a regular feature of what we do here, if not a dedicated hour each week. I'd like to get to one of the issues that I've heard you discuss at board meetings. I did research even on the web about it. And the issue that you run into is the jobs where the rubber meets the road, the caseworkers.
Yeah.
Because of the limited ability to compensate them, the number of cases they have to handle. It's a high turnover rate throughout, if you will call it an industry,
It's
throughout the
systemic, yeah.
practice. Tell us why that is so, and give us some of the factors that go into that.
So what we do is we help people to be able to get the right place and then the right answer. So if somebody wants Social Security, they may not know how to get it. If somebody wants food stamps, they may not know how to get it, or they may get turned down. So we have case managers who help them through whatever sets of issues that they have. We're not limited to any one area, but we're the people who are supposed to be joined at the hip with that person and help them to be able to move through a care plan of these are all my goals, these are all the things that I want to be able to accomplish. That role of case manager, working with 40 individuals who may have severe and persistent mental illness, is a heroic job. It is unbelievably hard because you're dealing with a significant number of people with a significant number of issues who don't necessarily have a strength in being patient.
Okay.
And the way that the job is valued by the system, not by us, the way the economics are set up is that they are not paid at a significantly high rate. So you deal with an enormous, relentless amount of stress in your job.
Now, what's the typical caseload for a caseworker?
40 people.
40.
Yeah, you deal with 40 individuals, and we try and mix it up so that, you know, there are some more challenging cases, and then there are some that are somewhat
who
easier.
stays? Who are the people that don't leave these jobs, or what opportunities for advancement are there, and what are you doing to recruit and help?
So the people that stick tend to be the people that have lived experiences of their own because they're more empathetic. They understand what it's like to be at the bottom and have somebody help you to be able to step by step get out of that.
Sure.
The challenges that we have is we're in a full economy, full employment economy, and you can get a job anywhere for a bunch more money than we can pay. And without the stresses and all of the other factors that go along with it. And recently, as we've gone through all of this change, the amount of paperwork and bureaucracy and everything that goes along with providing care for an individual has increased dramatically. So instead of being able to spend, let's say, 90% of your time helping a person, now it's 60% of the time, and the rest of it is filling out paperwork, which is, again, remarkably frustrating because if you've gone into this to help people and you're filling out forms and doing online things and all of that, you're not helping people.
And then you mentioned, too, I've heard you say there are times when one of your caseworkers has to take someone down to DSS, and they may sit there for 4 or 5 hours, and they're not getting any other work done.
Right.
I wanted to move to something else. I'm trying to hit to some of the treetops today because I think what we want to do is add this to our long-form set of reviews each week, maybe on a Thursday at 9. That's what I'm kind of thinking. But mental illness, it comes up again and again. And just for people in everyday life suffer from the neuroses of everyday life, particularly now in this in the world we live in, anxiety, depression, divorces, whether it be bipolar, all kinds of stuff. The average person can't even go see a shrink anymore. They won't even take insurance.
Right.
So to see a shrink, you better have $500 cash.
And
you may-
wait 5 months.
Yeah. And so, what can we do to help these people need medical care? How are we getting them to a shrink or a psychologist? And then, even if you get them to a psychologist, they can't write scripts.
We had a person who was, we were transporting a person somewhere, some appointment. And the way that it was structured at that time was we had somebody driving, the person was in the back seat, and we had another case manager next to him in the back seat. He decided that he wanted to test God's love. So he said, I'm going to jump out of the car at 30 miles an hour.
Okay.
If I live, God loves me. If I don't, God doesn't, and why would I want to live? It's actually not bad logic.
It's not bad logic if you believe in that way in the Almighty, as many
He
do.
jumps out of the car, ends up hurting himself, goes to the hospital. They take him to the psychiatric wing, and they won't admit him because his diagnosis isn't significant enough, and they let him out on the street.
What do you mean his diagnosis wasn't significant?
He wasn't
enough?
he
threw
wasn't sick
himself
enough
out of a car.
to get into a psychiatric hospital.
Well, because he was religious, and I am poking at the uber religious on that one. I mean,
Yeah, but that's what it's like now. If you want to see a psychiatrist, there's a 4 or 5 month wait. So if you're actively
what if I'm suicidal?
if you're actively suicidal, it's okay. Hold on to that thought. We'll get to you in June.
now, do we at least give them mind-numbing medication so they won't take their lives? So
Who could do that? A psychiatrist can
So what
prescribe
about
that.
all this rhetoric that's out there? Call us, seek help early.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, pull the firebox, even though
Mm-hmm.
we don't have them anymore, and we'll be there in a month.
There's a lot of phone support. There are a lot of places that you can go to be spoken to in the moment.
You know, you and I both know people, or in my case, my own self. When you have that level of agitation, you could keep talking for a month, and in circles, and maybe just the fact that you keep talking keeps you from taking your own life. But medication, you got to have medication to stop that.
You do.
All right, so tell us where you're at. Where are you headed now with recruiting? You know, one of the things I keep thinking about, you know, my past life was this training and organizational stuff, and I'm fascinated by this. There's got to be a way to make these jobs either more palatable or find the people that want to do this kind of work. Is there? I guess there's no magic bullet, is there?
No, the problem is that we've gone to an economic model that is almost a commission salesman role. The more people you take on, the more people that you can get, the more money that you can get paid. Right? So if I'm seeing 40 people, I can make X. If
And
I'm
you can
seeing
pay
50
people more money.
I can make 20-30% more. So there are certain places that will have higher caseloads, 50, 60. At one point there was 250 because there's no cap to it. But you're
that's-
not helping people.
You're not
at that
helping
point.
people. You're just
writing
funding
fiction.
you're funding your organization.
Right, but you
to-
can make more money
to sustain
So
mediocrity. Yeah.
we can lose people who want to be able to make $10,000 more a year, which is an enormous amount of money for someone in the
that
case
level.
management
Sure.
position. But they have to take on a higher caseload because you're paid on an individual basis. But you're not helping anyone. And we're trying to stick to our guns and say, this is our caseload because this is the maximum number of people that we can see and still actually provide a service that helps somebody to be able to live a better life.
Okay, we've got about 3 minutes left, at least for today's installment. Where's Choice headed? What are your priorities right now? Where do you want to bring the organization?
We are trying to expand the breadth of services that we have and be able to offer things like psychiatric services. There's a lot of process that goes into that, and we've started the process. That would be good because it gives our employees a career path, and it would be able to address part of the need within the county, which is to be able to have more accessible psychiatric services. We're helping people to be able to get jobs because somebody who has a job is 2/3 less likely to be hospitalized and their medical costs go down by 50%. We've started a food pantry so that people can come to us when they're hungry and we can help them to be able to get some of the basic things that they need. So there's a lot more to what you can do for a person other than just providing them with concrete, I need a house. There's a lot of things that you and I do every day to feel good. We exercise. Well, we're coming up with exercise programs for people who may not have housing. We eat right, so we're working with different grocery stores to be able to work with their dietitians and walk people through the store and show them the kinds of food that you can buy on food stamps that are healthy and how to prepare them. And we have a kitchen, and then we'll eat together. So there are things like social media. You know, if you're homeless, you're entitled to have a Facebook page. You're entitled to be able to connect back to people and to society and to email and to do things like that. And we want to help people to be able to do that. There's a lot that goes into it that isn't just the tangible, I need a house,
clearly.
I need a check.
Now, you've titillated a lot of people, and it's a good place to start as we get rolling and including choice in our lineup of things we talk about. I'd like to give you a moment here. If someone is interested, A, if they need help, who should they call? Or B, if they're interested perhaps in doing this kind of work, because a lot of people do.
Sure.
And as you expand in your recruiting efforts, how should they get a hold of you? Where can they get information?
So our website is choiceofny.org, and you can find about employment opportunities. You can see some of the things that we do. You can reach out to us through the website, or you can call 914-576-0173. Yes, in Westchester, that's 914-576-0173, and we will help. Our report card every week is how many people proactively contact us asking for help, because that means they've heard somewhere in the community that we're doing a good job.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, what I'm also going to ask you to do is take a look at the calendar, see if it's going to be you or whomever. Right now, our plan is to have a choice segment each Thursday at 9.
Cool.
And try and help with what your organization does, but more importantly, help the homeless and the mentally ill. And this way we can do an expanded show each week. Now, you've heard it, folks. Guy Fessenden, he's the executive director of Choice. Don't go anywhere. We're going to go straight to a Harvard-trained doctor about heart. Maybe I'm going to tell him that I drank a Monster when I probably shouldn't. Guy Fessenden, thank you very much.
Thanks, Bob.
All righty, we will change gears, and a little bit about that changing gears, and we're going to get straight to it as we pass through 8:01. And our next guest, he's ringing again. I thought we had him. Our next guest is Dr. Deepak Bhatt. He's the director of interventional and cardiovascular program at Brigham and Women, and also from the Harvard Medical School. There's a new medication out that they're using to help people, but more importantly, I've got some questions for him about how to prevent heart attacks and so forth. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Deepak Bhatt, and it's B-H-A-T-T. I hope I pronounced it right. Good morning, doctor. How are you? Doctor? Hello. Doctor, are you there?
I certainly am. Good morning.
Oh, my apologies here for that delay. It's great to have you, Doctor. I'm very anxious to talk about this new medication, but first a little more about what you do. I've already announced to the audience that you're director of the interventional cardiovascular program at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and also the work you do at Harvard Medical School. So we can get right to cases, but I want to get to one that we often talk about on this program, if I may.
Sure.
How come in this day and age we do not have a better way to definitively determine blockages and things that lead to myocardial infarctions and heart attacks short of an angiogram? I know they have virtual angiograms. Are they working on anything so that we don't read the story of a 51-year-old who just drops dead of a heart attack for lack of having had a test?
Well, that's really the holy grail of cardiology. No one yet has figured out a way of determining who's going to have a heart attack well in advance of that happening. For sure, you're right. If someone's having chest pains and that prompts a test like a cardiac catheterization or a coronary angiogram, that for sure can determine the degree of blockages. But short of doing that, there are tests that can be suggestive if someone has, for example, a stress test when they get on a treadmill and they're hooked up to some EKG electrodes or get an ultrasound of the heart. That can provide clues, but even that sometimes can be quote-unquote normal, and someone can still have a heart attack the next week. So there's no bulletproof way of knowing ahead of time. But what we do know are risk factors for heart disease, and control of those risk factors can help reduce the risk of heart attack.
Remind people of what they are before we get into our main purpose. There are some new drugs on the market to talk about, but what are the risk factors that you worry about most?
Well, one of the biggest one is high cholesterol levels, but also if people have diabetes, that's a really powerful risk factor for heart disease. Smoking is another important risk factor for heart disease. Being overweight, because that goes along with lots of other risk factors, is also a big one. High blood pressure is another one. And then as people get older, the risk for heart disease goes up even under the best of circumstances. But for sure, the first line of attack is making sure people are on a good, healthy, plant-based diet, that they're getting regular physical activity, preferably exercise itself, but if not that, at least just regular physical activity in terms of lots of walking and that sort of thing. But even if people are doing all those right things, there are studies from mummies and other sources, even in ages past, even in people that are on relatively good diets, atherosclerosis or hardening of the arteries or blockages in heart arteries do tend to form as one gets older.
Okay, that's good for us to know. And again, we're with Dr. Deepak Bhatt. He is a cardiologist, obviously the director of interventional cardiovascular program at Brigham and Women's, and also does work at the Harvard Medical School. Doctor, there are drugs. There are better drugs every day. There are better statins. There are better vasodilators. I take a blood pressure medication and a statin, but yet I'm still able to play hockey at almost 70 now because I watch my weight and eat fairly well. But there are people who've had problems or on the cusp of having problems, and I understand there are some new medications that can help them. Talk to us about that. And what presents that they need them and what they do.
Well, absolutely. First of all, it sounds like you're doing all the right things, but despite that, there are people doing all the right things that run into trouble, as I alluded to earlier. And one risk factor I mentioned was high cholesterol, and you mentioned you're on a statin. And just for any of your listeners who don't know, statins are good medicines that lower cholesterol levels. And for people with high cholesterol levels, they've been shown to reduce heart attacks and strokes. That line of research first came out about 25 years ago. But what we've done more recently in a trial called Reduce It was study a drug, a prescription medication called icosapent ethyl. It's a prescription omega-3 fatty acid. And what we did was show that that drug in people at increased cardiovascular risk who have elevated triglycerides, that's different from cholesterol.
Yes.
Triglycerides are another type of fat in the blood. That those sort of folks have about a 30% reduction in things like heart attacks and strokes and dying from those causes. So really, in my opinion, probably the biggest development in cardiovascular prevention since statins were first introduced.
Okay, now what do these drugs do? Now, we've often read about these omega-3 fatty acids. We hear about fish oil, but it's rare that we've heard of an FDA drug that's come out like this. Explain the difference.
Yeah, that's a great question. So this particular prescription medication, meaning you have to go to your doctor to see if you're eligible and then get a prescription for it, this particular medicine has been FDA approved now for reducing things like heart attacks and stroke or needing bypass surgery or stents or getting hospitalized for chest pain in people with elevated triglycerides who have either established atherosclerosis, which is a fancy medical term for saying plaque in their heart arteries or their brain arteries or their leg arteries that's causing trouble, or in people with diabetes plus additional risk factors for heart disease. So those sorts of people are now eligible for this FDA-approved medication called icosapent ethyl.
Now, how do they get this medication? Should they ask their doctor about it?
Well, I think just like most people these days know their cholesterol level and their blood pressure and their weight, or at least they should know those things. I would add to that list now to know your triglycerides. So the first step is just knowing your triglycerides. And they're always measured. Whenever you get a cholesterol measurement, the triglycerides are measured too, but for years doctors haven't been paying attention to them because there wasn't really any great reason to pay attention to them. But now we've shown that this medicine in people with triglycerides that are elevated, and really by elevated I don't mean super elevated, just even modestly elevated, that this medication can reduce their risk of things like heart attack and stroke. So the key is to A, get your triglycerides measured and know what the value is, but B, if they're elevated, to talk to your doctor and see, might you benefit from this new advance.
It makes a lot of sense. Again, we're talking with Dr. Deepak Bhatt. He's the Director of Interventional and the Cardiovascular Program at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and works also with the Harvard Medical School. And we're talking about this new medication. What's the brand name? What does it go by, Doctor?
Sure. So the brand name of it is Vascepa, spelled V-A-S-C-E-P-A. And what it is, again, the chemical name is icosapent-ethyl, but it's a prescription omega-3 fatty acid, specifically icosapentaenoic acid, or EPA, which is a type of omega-3 fatty acid.
Okay. Where can we get more information about this medication?
Sure. Well, the main results of the trial I mentioned, Reduce It, have been published in the New England Journal of Medicine. So that would be a place if somebody really want to get a lot of details. But really the best step is to talk to your doctor and find out, are your triglycerides elevated? And if they haven't been measured, well, along with a cholesterol level, they should be.
Doctor, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time today, and I'm going to look into it and take better care of myself. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
You too. Bye now.
All right, thanks a lot. So now we've dealt with mental illness and heart, and next we're going to deal with my own mental proclivities. But first, we do want to share with you a little bit more about the weather. And the weather this morning is brought to you by United Hebrew of New Rochelle, voted one of America's best rehabilitation and senior care campuses, and it's right here in New Rochelle. Visit uhgc.com. And oops, I hit the wrong button. That's why I came out so loud. But nonetheless, it is 34 right now, getting up to 40. We have partly sunny skies, turning windy. Scattered snowflakes later on. Not too much, though. It looks pretty good out there. The sun's looking good. Now, that's through mid-morning. But after mid-morning, high winds, Jake, they're expected with gusts to 45 miles an hour. Tonight, windy, frigid, lows around 20. Wind chills are going to feel like 0 to 10 NPH. Tonight, windy, frigid, as we said. Thursday, sun, cold, highs around 32. Tomorrow night, clear, highs 27. Friday, it begins to warm up. It'll be cloudy, but it'll be 47. And then imagine Jake Schaefer in his Speedo, because Saturday, it's getting up to 60 degrees. And the top of the 8 o'clock hour is brought to you by our friends at United Hebrew, a top-rated campus of senior care. Visit uhgc.com. Aging Issues Management, the law firm of Payne & Kahn, Plug-in Virtual Reality, and Dominic's Fine Cigars, who will be sponsoring Jake's Picks of the Week. But Jake has done his homework, and he comes into us today, and he says, we've been getting letters from...
Bob, our last guest skipped right on out of here with my cell phone.
Are you serious?
If you're listening in...
Oh, well, we'll get him. We'll call him right up, and we'll get him back with your cell phone.
I need to put a sign up on my Nook.
Where was your phone? He left with your cell phone. Okay, we're going to call him in a minute. We'll do this in the moment. Well, let's call him before. Folks, this is great. This is coming to you live, not on film. All right.
I need a sign for my Nook. Jake only.
Jake, you left it on a table. That's why. Well, we're going to call him right now. And, folks, this is coming to you live, not on film. We better call him, otherwise he'll be too far gone. I still hate, it says call, but it doesn't call. It's just amazing, amazing. All right. These most overrated devices, that is what they are. Come on.
So I couldn't figure out today what the back page of the New York Post was going to be. My guess was Judgment Day, but they went with The Judge is In.
Yeah, The Judge is In. Well, you were shocked at that. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but you gave me some information.
But the jury is totally out.
every Wednesday for the last 55 years. Very funny. You wrote this for me,
No,
but
it's your introduction.
I've been taking a few minutes to answer my voluminous listener mail. Tuesday or today is no different. It's actually 15 years since I've been on mornings. And I got to get this guy for you. I do not understand what's wrong with my phone. But nothing ever surprises me about this phone. When you put call, it's supposed to work, but it's not working. So,
Here, just write his number down and I'll call him while you read your viewer mail.
okay, here's the number. And, well, actually, I got to write it down. We don't give this stuff out. That's why, they said it was no longer de rigueur to have, what's the word I'm looking for? It was no longer de rigueur to have phones on your hip. And so people placed them on tables and things like that. And there it is. And his name is Guy Fessenden. All right, let's get to it, folks. Let's
I just realized I don't have a phone to call him with.
use mine. He said, boy, you're really a bright one today, I'll tell you. Use my phone. All righty, these are the letters, and we've got to use different music for this. Let's use, I like this to read my letters. All right. You have a very strong regional accent. I didn't think that I did. Did you ever consider trying for more standard American English when you went into broadcasting? William in Westchester. Well, William, I didn't think that I did, but yes, I can employ that more standard American English, but it wasn't necessary here, and I've done national shows, and they had no problem with it. Okay, I've stepped outside of your studio this afternoon of December 14th at around 3:15. Who should I look into suing? You're on the town of New Rochelle, or in the town of New Rochelle. I would like Bob Cox to look into this. No name as of yet. If you slipped at 3:15, you can sue the city of New Rochelle. My obligations end at the front door. Did you call him? Did he knew? Okay. My obligations end at the front door. And the regional accent is very limited, by the way. Weisenheimer.
I didn't write that one.
Oh, yeah, okay. But, okay.
Handwriting.
Dear Mr. Marrone, after hearing that your favorite Christmas movie starred a Playboy playmate, oh, you do remember that, do I ever want to hear what you consider to be your favorite movies of all time? Yes, but I'm guessing you haven't seen mine, so why don't you go to your local Blockbuster Video and rent a few? This person's are Annie, Wizard of Oz, and Sound of Music. Enid. Well, that would be woman stuff. No, my favorite movies of all time, okay? There are several, from obviously The Godfather, Goodfellas, those are mob movies. Another one, believe it or not, is a 50, 60-year-old movie called Beckett. And believe it or not, a movie about friendship called Nobody's Fool with Paul Newman. So those are my favorite movies. And the only reason I say yes, it was a Playboy movie, but a playmate, she had been a playmate. You're talking about McCarthy. But the movie's actually sweet. It's about a woman whose parents are Mr. and Mrs. Claus, and she falls in love and all that. It has nothing to do with the fact that McCarthy is gorgeous or any of that. Okay, if you can invite 6 people to a dinner party, who would they be and why? Wow. Okay. I'd have to think about that a little bit. I'm going to wait to answer that. But just off the top of my head, Thomas Aquinas, Christopher Hitchens, they can debate. Martin Luther King certainly would be there. Jesus Christ, of course, if that could be done. And those are my first 4. Did I do 4? And I got to wait on the other 2. Bonus question, what would you put in a time capsule? Curious Casey from Marrone, New York. What would I put in a time capsule? I would put a history of all the wars that we have, and hopefully by the time people opened it, they would realize the role of tribalism, the fact that we're all still pretty much adolescent as a species, and religion in there, and say, how can we remix this? Because half of the killing in the world is thought to be that my supernatural being is smarter and more right than yours. So that's what we have. I still have to give you 2 more people if I had, if I was going to be at a dinner table. 2 more. Jake, what are your favorite? Who would you like to have dinner with if you could?
You?
Well, we're going to do that. We're going to have a card game soon, but go ahead.
know. I'd have to think about that one. When
Okay.
I came up with that question, I had you in mind. I didn't even consider it. Didn't even
Okay.
consider the time capsule either.
Well, later on, we're going to talk about it in a little while. All right, that's Jake's. Well, no, we're not going to do Jake's Picks of the Week, but we do want to ask him before we go to Al Tarantino this question. How surprised were you yesterday at the fact that they didn't go to Mr. Rule, number one, number two? That's the Giants. In my monologue today, I came to a conclusion that the Giants, it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and they didn't ask out the pretty girls or the pretty men, or handsome men, depending on their sex and or proclivities. And so now they got stuck with the one in the corner.
They had their gun to their head both ways. Carolina paid Rule a ton of money. He's the sixth highest coach in the NFL right now, which is ridiculous. And Judge was about to take the job with Ole Miss, so the Giants had to act. Rule called the Giants and said, I'm going to sign with Carolina. Here's what I want. Here's what they're giving me. Can you match that? Giants couldn't match that. So they were stuck, and Judge was about to sign with Ole Miss, which is his alma mater, so had to do it.
But they had to do it. But this really was not their first choice, was it?
No, I think it was Rule.
Yeah, it was Rule. Well, they screwed up.
Carolina opened up the checkbook.
They should have fired Gettleman.
How
We'll leave it
about
at that.
this New York Post?
Go ahead.
How about this New York Post headline when the Giants play Carolina?
What's that?
Waiting on a ruling from the judge.
You can go now. Thank you very much. Jake Schaefer, everybody. Don't forget, he's still percolating his picks of the week, and I can't wait, especially now considering everything else going on. We are calling up Al Tarantino, whom we're getting to. No, we're actually still almost on time. We're not that far off. But he'll see this, and he will call us back, because Al Tarantino's next. He's your city councilman from District 2 here in New Rochelle. And after that, we're going to talk with A.J. Woodson at 8:35. He is the editor-in-chief of Black Westchester magazine. I do believe Al picked up. Mr. Tarantino, good morning. No, he didn't. Who's on the line? Nobody. There he is. Sorry about making that so loud. Good morning. You're on Radio Westchester. You're on the air.
Good morning, Bob. This is Tom from Pelham.
Oh, it's Tom. I'm sorry. We'll take your call. What's on your mind? Mr. Tarantino hasn't called yet anyway. What's up?
Well, when he calls, I'll step aside. What a beautiful blue blazer you're wearing today.
You like it, huh? Don't I look handsome? I got to go out and beg for
really
money.
sets off that full head of silver hair.
Yeah, though it's almost white now. But I don't like to brag, but I clean up okay once in a while. What's on your? Thank you for that. What's on your?
You have a big business meeting coming up?
I have a few. It's called begging.
Oh,
No,
okay.
actually, we have. It's funny. We have a lot of people want to sponsor. Now we just have to put our nose to the grindstone and get that done.
Well, yeah, you and I have to speak about that.
Yes, and I'm willing to come and dress up and see you too and entertain you over a bubbly or a meal. We certainly will. But more importantly, I want to give you a chance to say what's on your mind this morning.
Oh, a couple things. Just something first on the housekeeping matters. I like looking at the screen, of course, of you. And I wonder now why it's sort of a split screen look, whereas before it used to be a full screen.
Okay, that is a very good question, because we wanted to start it yesterday. We worked all weekend, but there was still one technical hitch. The reason we have a split screen unfulfilled is you'll now see the guest or guests.
Oh, okay.
So
Then we're going to see Jake, too, right? We're going to see Jake?
Yes, we're saving that one for Halloween for you to see Jake. But yes, you will see Jake.
Poor Jake. Jake does not deserve that. Jake's very respectful to you all the time, Bob.
Do you know? No, he is. Jake's. No, you don't know. Some of the stuff he writes that you don't understand. He does some of the writing in bits, and they're built-in insults in those. Believe me, like 55 years I've been on the air, Jake. 55 years. Now, the one thing we did, though, we like to keep Jake happy, okay? And there's a spot in the radio station where he prefers to sit, not on one of the mic stations. And so we redid the whole studio this weekend. A lot of work, and plus the technical stuff, a lot of new technology. It's really, you should come by. It's really terrific. But at any rate, he has his little nook over there. And so at the end of the night, I'm looking around. It's 12 o'clock, midnight on Sunday. Oh, no. Wait. We can't have that over by the window. Jake likes to sit right here. And so we set him up with his own little spot in the corner. You're happy now, Jake, right? He's very happy. So, all right.
Who pilfered his phone? Did he get his phone back?
Guy Fessenden, who does all this wonderful work to help the homeless, stole his phone and ran out of here with it.
Somewhere there's a homeless man with a nice phone to be using.
Yeah, he's watching Netflix right now in his doorway on Jake's time. I love the idea, Thomas. What else?
Bob, did you watch hockey last night?
You know, I did. I needed the break, and but I watched the Rangers, and Shester Kieran was okay. He was a little nervous in the beginning, but then he settled down. But watching two people in this city, hockey players. One is, of course, Arturi Panarin, but the other is your own Anders Lee. 2 games in a row, wins games. That's a gamer right there.
Yeah, well, it's a contrast of styles. The Rangers fly up and down the ice, and they score a lot of goals. And Islanders, boy, they scored 3 or 4 goals. I'm beside myself.
Yeah, but you
Is
guys.
it beside? Should I be beside or besides? What is the
Beside,
term?
it's beside yourself.
Beside myself. I know you're a wordsmith.
Well, you have to be to do this. You know, sometimes I screw up, and then like he was writing this stuff that it's obvious that letter didn't come from a fan. My regional accent came. He comes from Rochester, where he's a goober, wherever the hell he's from up in Syracuse. Did you know that Jake was his own cousin?
I don't know.
In fact,
I don't know anything about. I don't know anything about
God,
Jake's
yes.
lineage.
In fact, the double meaning when his mother said, "Jake, come on in, stop playing with your sister, and come in for dinner." You know that what she meant had a double. Go ahead, Jake. He's back on the
God's
mic.
honest truth is my wife, also from Syracuse, actually wrote that letter.
Oh, she did. Thank you very. She's also another goober.
Exactly.
Now his wife is. She was. Did you like her more when she was your sister? He just shook his head. Well, go ahead. Your parents are
My
listening.
parents are listening. My
Hi,
in-laws are
Mom.
listening.
Hi, in-laws. I
Well,
think it's really nice that you all kept it
we're
in
all
the
related.
family. They're all related, and you got to see their little boy. He's got the cutest little 3 heads you ever saw. There's something.
I got a question for Jake.
Yeah.
Yes.
Question for Jake. So, Jake, when the football season comes to an end,
Okay.
what will you be prognosticating about?
That's a good question. We'll do a lot of spring training baseball. Hopefully, Bob will let us go out to Arizona, Florida, go to all different teams.
I
see
think the
every,
host of I think the anchor of the show has to go out to Arizona. In that
No, I'm saying we'll
case.
both go.
Yeah, we'll both go.
You guys
That'll
take the green screen. Take it with you.
You know, that's true. We'll take the green screen with us. Well, listen, I saw Tarantino try to call, so we got to get back to him. Tom, thank you. You made our day.
Okay, Bob.
We'll talk to you
Take it
very
easy.
soon.
Bye-bye.
All righty. That's Tom from Pelham, and, of course, the great Jake Schaefer. You got to love Jake. All right, this is the one I missed. Al's going to yell at me now. Call up. You're not there. Do. All righty, we're a few minutes late, but it's worth it to be late for some people. He's the very competent and successful councilman from District 2 here in New Rochelle. And he also is scarcer than hen's teeth. A popular Republican is on our air. Good morning, Al Tarantino. Hello. Oh, for God's sakes. Pick up the phone. Thought we had him. He's unavailable. Oh, another public official is unavailable. What will we do? Let's try again. He's probably mad at me. Let's see. His phone is ringing. But remember now, folks, the way of the rule you have to tell people they're on the air as soon as they pick up. All right. He grew fed up with us because we ran late. See, now he'll probably call us back. 914 blah, 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 blah is unavailable. He doesn't recognize the phone number. You see, when we call out, it's a different phone number than the one he's used to. We're going to try one more time, and then we'll share the weather, and we'll try and get it. D-D-D, 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 D-D-D. This is what happens when we're both trying to call each other. This is exactly what happens. All right, we're going to wait for him to call. Meanwhile, I have to do a quick update on the weather. It is 34 degrees. We are going to get up today to a whopping 40 degrees. It's sunny right now, but high winds are expected this afternoon. We've already had the snow flurries. High winds are expected with gusts to 45. Tonight, windy and frigid. Thursday, sun, cold, highs around 32. But remember tonight, it could feel like 0 when we're done. Thursday, sun, cold, again around 32. Thursday night, clear, highs at 27. Friday, cloudy, 47. Saturday, cloudy. It will be 60 degrees. And my apologies to Al Tarantino. I'm going to try and get him one more time because that's how we roll. All right. No. It's ringing. But am I ringing or is he ringing? See, that's what I can never figure out. All right. I guess he's not going to. He doesn't love us. All right. We tried. We did our best. He's mad at me. But that's all right. He missed last week's hit. So we owe him one. We're looking straight ahead now at our next guest, A.J. Woodson. Now, a couple of stories that came out of Mount Vernon this week. We have a new mayor. We have a new fire commissioner who's a woman, though she's never been a fireman or woman herself. So we're going to ask about that. And we're going to ask about some of the interviews he's done with the attorney Sussman, who is defending different individuals, including the man who was accused and pretty much we know did take a hatchet to the rabbi in Muncie. So we'll be back right after this. Good morning as we head into the bottom of the hour. It is Wednesday, January 8th, 2029. It is 31 degrees, headed to 40 today. Again, it's Wednesday, January 8th, 2029. You're listening to Mornings with Bob Marrone. I am Bob Marrone. This is Radio Westchester, your radio station at the train station. And you can listen live on RadioWestchester.com. You can go to the radio app, MyTuner Radio, go to Mornings with Bob Marrone, or go to RadioWestchester.com. We're also streaming live on Facebook, Instagram, Periscope, YouTube, iTunes, soon to be on Spotify. You can get us every which way. Now, we're looking at some of the national stories and other issues that are making news today as we get ready for our next guest, and then we'll make that up to Mr. Tarantino. We'll get him tomorrow. We kind of screwed up with the phones there with him. Of course, U.S. Air Base in Iraq was hit by rockets in retaliation. Now, it doesn't look like anyone was hurt, and hopefully this will be the face-saving measure that the Iraqis took, although they are calling it, in their case, self-defense. Dow futures, meanwhile, tumbled 300 points. That's not really a lot, by the way. They look at that number. When 300 points was a lot when the Dow was 10,000. Now it's 20-some-odd thousand. It's not that big of a hit, but nonetheless, the Dow did take a hit. Gold is going up. More gold is going up. But more importantly for your pocketbook, so too is the price of oil. So now the question comes up, why would the Iranians target Iraqi bases? The Pentagon said Iran has launched more than a dozen ballistic missiles against them, and they're attacking these bases in Iraq because U.S. troops are housed there. Now, Canadian man claims that his company fired him for complaining about $6 barbecue sauce as a holiday gift. Imagine that. This came out of Fox News this morning. Pretty much hard to believe. All righty, we do have another caller coming in trying to get to us, and we'll take that call before we roll. Let's see if they answer or not. No, they will not. That's because I didn't have my... Oh, yes, they're there. Goody. Good morning. You're on Radio Westchester. Good morning. You're on the radio. Good morning. Well, they hung up for whatever reason, and I know our next guest is on the line. So they hung up. I just want to finish the story then. A new Tennessee state bill would force student athletes to play as gender identified at birth. Boy, do I agree with that 100%. Nobody, try and call me, please. We'll open up the phones later for it and tell me why that's not a good idea. You cannot have someone with the body of a man who goes through a sex change but has all this extra muscle and all this extra bone strength and some testosterone that probably just can't be gotten rid of. It's just not fair, and it's not fair to women. So women need to start speaking up about this. Okay, let's go to our next guest. He's the editor-in-chief of Black Westchester magazine. They cover Mount Vernon very, very carefully. Please welcome, without further ado, A.J. Woodson. Good morning, A.J. How are you?
Good morning, good morning, good morning.
You have a busy city indeed. So let's get...
Oh, absolutely.
So let's get to cases. You swore in a new mayor.
Yes,
we
Saturday.
Had her on the other day. She's announced a number of appointments. Talk about some of those appointments. Let's get to that first. And which ones jump off the page? The one that jumped off the page at us today is there's a commissioner with a great Army record and a great city record, but nonetheless, the commissioner of the fire department, and she has never been a fire person.
Yeah, there have been some mixed reviews of the appointment of the fire commissioner, but everyone I talked to has been pleased by the appointment of the police commissioner.
Yeah, so I hear. Why is that? Tell us who don't live there.
Glenn Scott. He's been with the Mount Vernon Police Department for a while. He's respected. He knows the job. I mean, we've had him on the show before. And all law enforcement stuff, I always defer to Damon K. Jones,
yeah,
in Blacks in Law Enforcement, and Damon has nothing but great things to say about him. So, that to me, even if I didn't know the man myself, that alone would be great.
Well, if you knew him, we might have questions about his character. But anyway.
Well, no, I do. He appears to be a man of character. If he is allowed to do his job, I believe that he will do a good job.
Okay.
And I think I thought Robert Kelly, I wasn't a fan of his in the beginning, but I grew to respect him. And since then, we haven't had, I think he'll be of that character.
Interesting. I have my own concerns based on some information that I had on anonymity, so I won't comment about Robert Kelly except to say he seemed to be very qualified. Whether he was a saint or a sinner, I don't know that we'll ever know. So let's move forward.
Right.
Let's,
Well, I'm just talking about qualifications.
right.
At this
Let's
point.
go to the
Like,
fire chief.
now,
Rob-
I don't know much about her, it's the first, and we're doing this thing. The first female, it's the first female ever to run the fire department. I believe, it's that historic thing that they keep talking about. But I'm not sure her qualifications. I have yet to talk to some of my sources at the fire department just yet. I've been running around with. We just had the town hall for the Save Marrone, Save and Transform Marrone Hospital.
yeah, we're going to talk. We're going to talk about that next. But,
Yeah, so I've been focused a lot on that. I haven't had a chance to actually sit down with my fire department sources to tell me what they how they feel as far as they can, so yeah, I can't speak intelligently. I'm sorry.
no, that's okay.
On her character of her,
I don't speak intelligently all day long, so if I were you, I wouldn't worry too much about it. My guest, of course, A.J. Woodson, the editor-in-chief of Black Westchester magazine. Well, the piece...
And I just want to say, before you go any further, leave Jake alone. I've heard all them comments about Jake and his family and his sister and his wife and all that. Leave Jake alone.
Leave Jake alone. He abuses me in ways y'all don't see. He's like Osama bin Jake, behind the scenes, torturing me, plotting my end.
I heard him say his family listening. His in-laws are listening. Why are you saying all of this
Well,
stuff?
and his family's here, well, because of all the inbreeding. They have several pairs of ears, some of them. So they... I'm going to hell. I'm going to hell, and this is a direct path, my friend. But, going back to the Ms. Norman, the new fire commissioner, she has quite a background, though. I got some of her background up. She spent 22 years as a military police officer. And
right.
And then Mayor Ernie Davis hired her as a deputy fire commissioner. So a lot of that
Right.
has to do
Now
with
she was deputy. I do know the name. But from what I've been told, now I'm still looking into this too. It's an administrative position, so it does not require her to have experience with the fire department.
That's correct.
That's what I'm told. But, I mean, in my mind, you would want someone who has been on the line, has went up the ranks in the fire department that knows,
Yeah.
to run the fire department. I mean, that's just, maybe that's not necessary, but that's just in my mind, in my personal opinion. But with everything with Sean Patterson Howard, I am just sitting here taking notes. I'm waiting and watching and giving her a chance to, prove herself and get grounded and get going. And I'm very critical. They say, I'm trying to give her the honorary honeymoon period,
yes.
to do what she got to do.
But nonetheless, she should be aware that Black Westchester magazine and news source is coiled like a snake, like a cobra, ready to pounce.
She knows that.
No, I know that.
We speak frequently.
Yeah, and she comes on, generally speaking, once a week, and we ask her those kinds of questions as well. Now
she'll be on our show the end of the month.
Well, we got so much to ask you about your show, too. Let's move on, though, to the rallies, etc. What is the latest with the hospital? We have a new mayor, and I'm sure she's as committed to fixing this problem as others were. What's the status? What are you hearing?
Well, one of the things, and I posted a video and I sent it to you, one of the gentlemen who is in the New York State Nurse Association broke down the entire process that Montefiore has to go through with the state to actually be able to decommission this hospital and to be able to operate in that urgent care thing that they're opening. And despite what they're putting out and the propaganda that they're putting out, they have not been approved to do all of this yet. So it's not a done deal. Like most people think it's a done deal, and he was breaking it down on why it's not a done deal. So there's plans to go up to Albany when they go ahead make the decision. A lot of the local pastors have actually agreed to to let their vehicles, their buses and vans be used to get as many people up to Albany from Mount Vernon to go to the meeting. There's going to be some kind of letter writing campaign. They're kicking off a rally or something in front of the hospital to galvanize the community Friday, I believe at 4:00. Actually, and all weekend, but kicking off Friday, then Saturday and Sunday. So there's movement. I don't know how successful it will be. I'm from a news perspective, taking my personal feelings out of it. But the other thing that came out, if they are allowed to decommission Mount Vernon Hospital, Mount Vernon may never be able to get another hospital ever. Or we'll have to jump through ridiculous hoops to be approved to be able to get another hospital. Decommissioning a hospital in your area is like one of the worst things that can happen, and you don't usually get another hospital.
Wow. So that's where we are right now. It sounds like this is going to take years to resolve. This isn't something that's going to happen overnight either way.
Well, I mean, the date to close was sometime in December next year, I believe. I mean, December this year. Now we're 2020. The meeting that may be taking place is January 23rd in Albany, but you don't know till 10 days before if that's going to be on the agenda. And if it's not on that meeting, it will be in a March meeting. So all I know is that, I will be going to the meeting, and they're galvanizing this weekend as many people as they can to get involved. And the organization that the Nurses Association, they've helped a hospital in Brooklyn that was in the same condition. They were able to stop them from closing that hospital. And it's the same people that are helping and getting involved. And shout out to the New York State Nurses Association. They're negotiating a contract, and they can settle, and they will be fine, and they will work somewhere. But they are holding out using the Saving Mount Vernon Hospital as a talking point in their negotiations. And they actually invited some people from the steering committee to the negotiating meeting, I think Friday, which Montefiore was very surprised to see those people in there. The chairman of the steering committee. So that's what's going on now. They inform the community. Now it's a matter of galvanizing them and getting the letter writing campaign going and all that. And they're signing petitions and all this other stuff, and planning to take a mass group up there to the meeting to show them that Mount Vernon Hospital means a lot to them, and they want to keep their hospital.
It ought to be very interesting. It's 8:45. We're talking with our guest, A.J. Woodson. He is the editor-in-chief of Black Westchester magazine. Now, you sent me some information, and I listened to some of it, and you had this interview with Mr. Sussman, the attorney for the gentleman who is, well, we know that he hacked him, but again, we have to say allegedly. You've interviewed him several times. Tell us about Attorney Sussman and what he's doing in the current case.
He's definitely, his resume is extensive. Civil rights attorney, the segregation cases in Yonkers, and he's, his resume is deep. I can spend a whole show talking about his resume. I wanted to get him on because I did have a relationship with him, and this was, this is now national news, not just statewide news. They're talking about this in Florida and California. I'm getting calls asking me what's going on. But his position is that this gentleman had a long history of mental illness.
Well, absolutely.
When he went to his place, he lives with his mother, there was the medication that he was on. There are like 20, 30 bottles that have never been opened. He keeps refilling the prescription, but he hasn't been taking them. The thing they talked about, the diary with the anti-Semitic stuff, he said he had yet to see it. He was there before the DA's office was there, and he got over 2,000, 3,000 papers of documents, and he said he saw none of that, and he has turned his stuff over. But whatever they're talking about that's anti-Semitic, they have yet to turn over to him. They have refused to show him. So he wanted to, there's been a lot of press because they're making him basically the poster child for anti-Semitism.
Yeah, and he's the
right
wrong
now.
guy to make the poster child because he's sick. Now, again, I've always said on this air, and I will till I die, what I've always wondered about people who get sick, it's like people who are devil worshippers or people who become white supremacists or whatever the case may be. When people become mentally ill or stilted, why don't they just, throw water balloons off a roof or eat too much chocolate? Why do they have to kill people? And then they pick in whatever, but this has to do with mental illness. They pick something that is hate fueled, even if it's just a one-off. It's always amazed me. But let me go back to your point. Yeah, this is definitely a case of a mentally ill man, and his anti-Semitism is probably not the real issue in his case.
Okay, you're breaking up a little bit, so I barely heard the question.
I'm breaking up. No, what I was saying is, in this case, this guy's clearly mentally ill. This is less a case of anti-Semitism and not than that it is. However, what happens is there are people who will think that to say that is to diminish that there is anti-Semitism. That's one thing. And the other thing, now I say this to someone as august as Murray Richmond, one of the great defense attorneys on the planet. One of the things about defense attorneys is, and I say this almost bluntly, so don't take me too literally, is they're one of the few people in public life who get to lie with approval. So with defense attorneys, I take them at face value. But the one thing that Mr. Sussman says that's true, and this new law should change it, is the prosecutors used to be able to not show defense attorneys all the stuff they got at discovery. Those days are over.
Right. So he was just saying, because I asked him the tough questions, whether I knew him or not.
Oh, I knew you would.
And questions like, there's a lot of people saying, how can you defend this man as a Jewish man and as someone who has a brother who's a rabbi? How can you defend this guy? And
but that's ridiculous.
He answered that question well. And I asked him about, the case, the mental illness, and the act, and I asked. You have to see the whole interview because I can't remember everything I asked him.
No, I know you did. But you know what? That's as un-American as apple pie. When people do, as un-American as anything that one can do. Here in this country, people have a right to be defended, and I applaud people of faith who defend someone who perhaps did something against their faith. I applaud people of color who defend a white person accused of something. That's the way America ought to be.
Right. But he did say, in combing through all of the documents that he got from him, one thing he was looking for was a history of anti-Semitism. He was looking for that, and he did not find that. So,
okay.
I just wanted to, address that whole thing. But then we turned the conversation. After we dealt with all the stuff he could talk about, I think that he's trying for a competency hearing now this week. I don't know how that went or if that happened yet. He's petitioned in the court now for a competency hearing to see if this guy's even competent to stand trial. But then we transitioned into a conversation of mental illness in our communities, which is a conversation we do not have, and we have a lot of mental illness that is not being dealt with. When we have we've had cases in Mount Vernon and several other places where officers were not trained to deal with emotionally disturbed individuals, they're not trained for it. And then these individuals end up getting shot, like gentleman Anthony Smith in 2014 by the Mount Vernon Police Department. So there's no training. It's interesting that they don't train the police officers who are the first responders that have to deal with them on the street, but Damon says they actually do train the correction officers when they get there. I think the police should be trained as well. And I saw something this week that I got from the county that the Department of Health is dealing with Rochelle Police Department is one of the first departments this week that they're starting to do something and train them to deal with some of the mentally ill. So they're supposed to be working with the county. I wrote that story too. I think I sent you a link.
Well, yes, you did. And you may have heard us talking with someone about mental illness earlier today. Okay, we're on a short leash today, but I'm probably going to be reaching out to you to see what other stories you'll be breaking before the weekend. Editor-in-Chief of Black Westchester Magazine, always a great job. Thank you very much, A.J. Woodson.
Thank you. Have a blessed day. Happy New Year's.
Happy New Year to you. We got to get out and have a holiday bubbly. Talk to you
Absolutely.
soon. I'll get you off air on that.
Win.
A.J.
Right.
Woodson will do, one of the good guys in this trade. Guess who's in the house? He'd been away for a couple of weeks. He is back. He is Al Tarantino, by the way, your colleague, if I may. Al Tarantino, we figured out why we couldn't connect. He was trying to get a hold of us on FaceTime.
FaceTime? Whoa.
Anyway,
I didn't know Al even knew
so
about FaceTime.
I think he just hit the wrong button.
Yeah,
And then we probably screwed up getting hold of him.
that's
We'll
on
get
his-
him on tomorrow.
yeah,
We'll do a
okay.
flip-flop. But we have another August city councilman with us
Oh, yeah.
today. He is the city councilman from District 4, one of the last males standing on our city council, along
Yep.
with Mr. Tarantino. Please welcome Ivar Hayden. Good morning,
Hey,
Ivar.
good morning, Bob. Can you
It's
hear me?
good to see you. How are-
I'm a
wait,
little
wait, wait.
fuzzy on here, but that's okay.
Well, no, here you go.
Am
What
I
about this?
fuzzy?
How's that?
Oh, that's better.
Yeah, see, this is a button.
Oh,
see
that's
that? You
it.
put
I
it
got
up.
that.
That's why I
Oh,
pointed to it before.
I didn't know that's you
See,
doing
folks,
with your finger.
he's
I
an
wasn't
artist,
sure.
but technology
wasn't sure.
leaves him. He's a little slow to check out
Look
technology.
at this ring of fire you have
Well,
here.
it,
This
it,
is-
it brightens up my face.
Are you now on... yeah?
We're on everything.
You're
YouTube,
kidding. You get
Instagram.
yeah, really? Okay.
I'm auditioning for for Halloween decorations.
Oh.
So with this face.
Oh.
So what do you think of the new revamped studio?
I
Pretty
think
cool,
it's
huh?
terrific,
A lot
as a
more
matter of fact.
room.
Yeah.
All spread out.
Got some of the equipment out here. Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Got it out of the way.
Even our little music.
You need a little better backdrop if you're going to be
No, that's not a backdrop.
live.
See, once again, but once again, your technical skills weaken. That is a green screen.
Oh, I know that's a green screen.
No, but
I mean this stuff. Right now you're seeing all this, right?
No, you can't. They can't. It's called camera blocking. See, look, see. Oh, you can see the printer. This is also an office. What else can you see? No, you're the artist. You tell us.
Oh, you see the can of bug spray. You
Where's
see
the bug spray?
No, I'm teasing.
Oh, God. Oh, now one of the things.
Oh, this is a high-class operation, right? The hair roller. Let's see. What
Nobody
else?
can.
Jeez, what is this anyway, huh?
It's also an office, Ivar. I'm glad you came in a good mood. Okay, you're right. We need
I
to
am
do,
in a good mood,
No,
actually,
well, see what we
yeah.
had. See behind you, and
Yes.
we don't have that camera on today, but it will be next week. You'll be on camera.
Oh, very nice.
See, we revamped that, but we
I like
have
that.
we
Okay.
had a screen there,
Yeah,
but we moved
yeah.
it to the other end because we want to start featuring the guests. Like yourself, and as impossible as the task may be, we want to feature you in the best possible light.
Oh, that's sweet. Thank
in
you.
which case, we hope is a death ray.
Yeah, it's a death ray. All
It's
these
good
little
to
things
see
are
you.
death rays. Look at
Now,
this.
well, do you want to pick on anything else?
No,
Anything
I'm,
else you
I'm,
want to
I'm
criticize?
totally happy having picked on what I've picked on. Yeah.
No, Jake. Do you
I
have
think-
anything else
I think
to
everything
say?
else looks very, very nice, as a matter of fact.
Jake was with us
Yep.
before.
Yep.
We gave him a hard time. He's from upstate New
Or
York.
maybe
his
the
own
overflowing
cousin.
garbage with the Red Bull cans in it. How about that?
Nobody.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't
can
mean
see
to mention
that. Folks, we only wish it were election time so that we could
Yeah, so
beg
you could
you.
hammer me. Right?
Ivar hiding what? What is it that he's hiding? Anyway,
Yeah. What are you hiding?
this is great. It's good to see you.
it's good to see you.
Because someone was even saying yesterday, all the crazy news, lighten it up a bit, and I'm so glad you did. And I didn't take out the garbage yet. I left bug spray out, my brush, because this is also an office.
I understand. I fully
And
understand.
we will handle the. Now you're an artist by
Well,
trade.
you've been to my place. You know what that looks like, right? It's covered. It's a junk and stuff everywhere.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
right?
Nagasaki looked better
Nagasaki,
after the
yeah.
blast.
I agree. I agree.
No, we're good. Thank you, Jake. Jake's going to check in with his family. He's all the Goobers from
okay.
upstate.
Gotcha.
He's
Gotcha,
married to his
gotcha.
own sister. It's a shame. But anyway, I digress.
Anyway, hello.
You guys had your great inauguration the other day.
It's actually very nice.
Yeah, that's what I heard. I could not
yeah.
make it. I had other orders.
Yeah,
ahead.
I think it was. It seemed appropriate. It was very nice. It was friendly, bipartisan, et cetera, et cetera. And it's going to be a very different council, which I think is appropriate. I mean, this is. appropriate for the times. We need change. We need fresh ideas. We need new people coming in.
And, well, some people
and
think
I'm
it's
very
going.
encouraged by that.
Some people think it's going to be. See, here's more garbage. You want to see it go out?
Well, those are news articles. That's serious.
No,
That's,
no. One of the great things about doing news, once you do it, it's done.
That's true. It's
you go
not
into
news
the next
anymore.
page,
You're
and
right.
then you redo it tomorrow. So,
Yeah, right.
but I just thought I'd bust your chops with that
Oh,
one.
that's good. That's good.
Well, you know what? It is important, though. I think this is going to be a much more independent city council.
I think potentially, yeah.
And it's about time that we have more women. We have a woman of color on the council.
Yep.
Although we still have it. I've been picking on her. I know she's a nice woman, but we're still waiting
Sarah.
for Miss Kay to say something. She's the Miss Freed of the new decade.
Give her a chance.
The quiet and the mum.
Yeah, I think just give her a chance. I
No,
think for
I know.
all of us,
She's
when we're
shy.
first on, you don't have a clue. I mean, it's kind of, you get hit with this.
No, I know.
You're suddenly thrown into the mix. Nobody teaches you anything. You've got to kind of earn while you learn, and it's difficult. It is, and I think unless you're used to being in the public eye, it's hard. It's
See,
hard. For
I'm
people.
used to it, though. My lifelong
Yeah.
reaction to women to me is not to pick up the phone. So I'm glad I'm used to this. But actually, I understand she did very well. She gave a very nice opening speech.
She did. She gave a very nice speech. Yep.
And
Yep.
Liz Freed said hello to someone, I understand.
Yes,
And
yes.
So we're making
No,
headway.
it was a remarkably effective council over the last 8 years. I mean, we accomplished a tremendous amount of things, and I think for the benefit of the city for the long haul. I genuinely do. And it was congenial, a lot accomplished. Hey, now we see what happens. I mean, this is a whole new phase, and it's appropriate, and we have a lot of issues coming up. Right from the get-go, there are going to be issues to deal with, and the new council is going to have to get its feet wet really quickly. So.
Yeah, they are. One of the things we're sensing, and this is coming from the left, and coming from the left who've certainly supported the mayor a great deal, we're beginning to see now, even we hear from Ms. Kay, we hear through channels because we don't hear it exactly from her, but there's a pushback now on development. Some people even calling for moratorium. Where is this coming from and why? Do you know?
I think that, it's difficult to try to balance everything. I personally feel that we need to take a deep breath, which is not to say stop with
Just
development.
evaluate.
Take a deep
Assess.
breath. Look at what we've done. I'm a visual guy. I'd love to see.
Well, you're an
I'd love
artist.
to see a map.
Yeah, you
with,
pointed out the
know,
bug
with-
spray,
with
you
all of
pointed
the, a kind of a general map showing us where everything is going, giving us a sense of
I'm looking for
of
ways
what
to
we're
enroll.
actually developing. And there are genuine issues, and the issues are in terms of parking, traffic, affordable housing, connectivity between projects. There are real issues that we need to give a little bit of thought to.
Well, there
And
are.
I would be perfectly happy to, as I say, take a break, slow down a little bit, look at it, try to figure out where we want to go, what we want to be when we grow up. Green space is another issue. We have no downtown playground for kids. We have very little green space in terms of all of these buildings. And this is all stuff we need to look at.
Okay,
we need
so
to consider.
taking
But
a break.
I'm not saying that we should stop the development process. I also feel, as we've all felt for a long time, New Rochelle twice missed out on major development because of recessions. We don't know what's going on in this country with the federal government, obviously, and it's scary. And if the markets tank for whatever reason, banks and investors, funds dry up for development projects, and suddenly we're
Well-
back to where we were in the 80s. And
Yeah,
and so that's one of the reasons we've pushed so hard to try to get things going.
Well, I'm
So-
not sure. While I agree, and this is just by way of juxtaposition, while I agree that it's always good to take an assessment, if not necessarily a recess, what I find is I'm not hearing a good, clear reason to stop development. What I'm finding, I don't know yet, kind of like what's happened with our schools, if it's agenda driven or not. If
No,
finally
I-
somebody
in-
got a bug in their bonnet that says, well, development is bad, then
There's always been a group here in New Rochelle that's been anti-development, partly because change is difficult, partly because people do not have faith that what we're trying to accomplish is really going to be beneficial financially for the city based on past history. But that has proven itself not to be true over the last year. The figures that we have shown publicly for the development and the revenue, the tax revenue, the property tax revenue that's coming in already, even with the pilot programs in their early stages, is substantial. And this money is being used to offset a lot of things.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why we had no property tax increase in this last budget cycle, which was the first time in 25 years. So I think, this kind of reluctance and fear, which is what it is to some extent, kind of dies slowly. I think people will see the benefits, but there are genuine issues that I am concerned about and that my constituents are concerned about. And I think these need to be looked at seriously and given a little bit of thought. And at least, I'm not saying stop development, I'm just saying maybe tweak development in
or
slightly
reassess
different
it,
ways so
just
that
if
we
it's
can
necessary.
say, okay, fine, you can get your community benefit bonus, but maybe what we want is something that's not on the current list. Maybe what we want is to pay into a parking structure. Maybe what we want is more green space in the downtown. Maybe what we want is something else. Maybe deeper affordable. Maybe we should have, let's say instead of 10% of the buildings at 80% of AMI, maybe we should do 10% at AMI and another 10% at 60% of AMI. We need to start to look at this a little more carefully.
Makes a lot of sense. Before we let you go, I just wanted to inform you and the listeners of a breaking story. Actually, it's an hour old, but we just didn't get a chance to get out with it. And we didn't want to break in. A Ukrainian, this is interesting, a Ukrainian International Airlines passenger plane carrying 170 people crashed in Iran shortly after takeoff this morning, killing all on board. That Iran and Ukraine should be involved in the same story. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but boy, that's rich.
It's.
And,
I heard about that just before I left my place this morning. Yeah.
Well, we're going to ask Harlan
the hits
Ullman about
keep
it.
coming.
He's up next. Harlan
No,
Ullman
I
is
think that's a
international
good.
renowned
I don't think
speaker.
it's in Iran's interest to shoot down a plane that I understand was half filled with Iranians.
No, and I don't think
So-
it's in Iranian or United States interest. I'm sure it's a coincidence, but it's just one of those things.
Yeah.
Before you go, what's your priority for the new year, Councilman?
I think my priority really is sitting down with the new council members, getting to know each other a little bit better. I certainly know them, but talking about specific issues and letting them know how I feel about things and helping them understand any of the nuances of the issues that we're going to be dealing with. And we're going to be dealing with those issues within a month. So, I mean, these are things that we really need to do. But I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah.
I have... you know me, I am very comfortable with strong, smart, intelligent women. I've been around women like that my whole life, including my wife, Diane, who's wonderful, and everybody else that I've been involved with in my, my adult life.
You're going to get a chance
So
to deal with them
I
now.
enjoy that. I really do. And I'm enjoying looking around the council table and seeing these smart faces and dealing with these
Sign of the
people.
times.
Yep,
And
sign
a
of the
good sign
times,
of the
absolutely.
times. Thank you very much, Ivar Hyde,
Thank you.
District 4 here in New Rochelle. Thank you for coming in. We really appreciate it. Harlan Ullman will be with us in about 60 seconds. He's our 9:05 guest today. He was with us yesterday. He was kind enough to come on without much warning yesterday to update us on the assassination of the general. But before we do that, one last check of the weather and getting into the top of the hour. It is 34 right now, getting up to 40 today, partly sunny, although we're seeing some clouds now, turning windy with scattered snow showers into the afternoon through mid-morning or so, but then high winds expected with gusts to 45. Tonight, windy, frigid, lows around 20. Wind chills 0 to 10 Thursday. We'll have sun, cold, highs around 32. Night, still chilly. It'll be clear, 27. Friday, it begins to warm up. It'll be cloudy, but 47 degrees. And then on into Saturday. Wear your bathing suit because we're getting up to 60 degrees. And we wonder if it'll be that way in Washington. We'll ask Harlan Ullman about that in a moment. Remember, the top of the hour is brought to you by the United Hebrew of New Rochelle, a top-rated campus of senior care. Visit uhgc.com. Aging Issues Management, the law firm of Payne and Con, Dominic Cigars, and plug-in virtual reality. And it is time to go to our guest. Again, he was kind enough to help us out yesterday. So much more has happened in less than 24 hours. Please welcome, without further ado, international national security expert, columnist for UPI, wrote a great piece on Monday. His book, Appropriate Now, Anatomy of Failure, How America Loses the Wars It Starts. He consults governments, he consults the people from NATO, the Atlantic Council, generals, foreign ministers, etc. Please welcome Harlan Ullman. Good morning. Oh, he's gone. We lost him. I thought I hit the right button, but we did not. So that means That means that I have to call him, which I will do directly. Let's see. What is wrong with my phone? I see what the problem is. We're going to recall. Okay. Yep. This is live radio, so you have to deal with what we're doing. Okay, let's try it. Just give us another minute. All right, the phone is dialing. We will be with our guest in a moment. We thought he was on hold while we were wrapping up. All right, here he is. We've already introduced our guest. We've already told you who he is. It is 9:07, a couple of minutes late. Wow. As he just wrote in a note to us a little earlier today, much has happened. He has much to say. We've already introduced him. Harlan Ullman, good morning.
Good morning.
Now, I don't think it has anything to do with anything else, but that's because I don't know about these things. But how rich is it that a Ukrainian flight leaving from Iran crashed? People are going to try and make all kinds of stuff out of this. Just one of those great coincidences in life?
At this stage, nobody really knows. It's probably an accident, but this is really not good news for Boeing because it's a 737, even though it's not a MAX X. But I think this is an isolated event.
So do I.
And I think the big loser in this particular case is going to be Boeing because their credibility is going to be further eroded since this was supposed to be a safe airplane. But
although it is,
what happened?
There's 10,000 of them, I think, out there. They rarely crash, and this is just one of the things I take great interest in. I don't trust outside of Europe and the major Asian countries and the United States and Australia. I don't trust most of the other airlines and their training and such. But that's just
well, a lot of them, I wouldn't go that far. A lot of them are in many ways even safer than ours because their pilots are quite competent. But I think, Bob, that's eccentric right now. The issue is what's going to happen with the president's talk and what happens next in Iran. And I think irrespective of what Trump may say this morning, though I do believe he's going to claim a victory lap, which is his right to do, and I don't see this thing getting any worse. I think this is a good opportunity to back down and find some off-ramps. What it does demonstrate to me is the fact that we have overestimated the damage that and the danger posed by Iran. Their response to the death of Soleimani with 15 ballistic missiles, which appear to have been targeted to land on sand, not on people.
Mm-hmm.
And they were alerted, or I should say Iran alerted virtually everybody in the world that this attack was coming, suggests to me that Iran is far more of a paper tiger than successive administrations have believed. And I think that's long overdue. We've overrated the danger of Iran. Even though Hezbollah is not a force for good. And I hope that the president can employ enough statesmanship to use this as a prospect for some sort of a diplomatic negotiation with Iran. However, while I think that this crisis appears to be over, the question of what happens next is very, very, very real, and whether or not this administration has the ability and the foresight to be able to exploit this. But my conclusion is that we have exaggerated the dangers posed by Iran for a considerable amount of time, and this response was the very, very least that they could possibly do, and they took every means to telegraph to us that this was not going to be a serious strike. And if we ignore that, then that is going to be on us.
If we ignore that, it would be, well, I hate to be redundant, but it would be ignorant and ill thought. Because one of the things, after talking with you yesterday and developing a sensibility for the international scene that you've helped us create in our own minds, it was important that they needed to save face but not do something that escalated it. And it seems that some good thinkers in Iran figured out a way to do just that. And the thing is, I would imagine our State Department and our generals would realize that, won't they?
Bob, I'm so cynical that I really don't trust any White House anymore. And this goes back to Vietnam.
Yeah, me either.
But you take a look at Vietnam, you take a look at the Clinton administration with the 78-day war in Kosovo, and you take a look at Bush 43 and Iraq, you take a look at Obama and red lines and so forth. For whatever reasons, I just don't know that our White Houses are qualified or capable enough of dealing with these issues in a sensible way. This is not a critique of Donald Trump. This is a critique of the American decision-making process. And so I certainly hope that there are people who have wiser viewpoints that are going to be respected. But our history is not good, and maybe Trump will be an exception to the rule. I certainly hope he is. But based on our past conduct, one cannot be optimistic that we're going to be able to exploit these opportunities.
Doesn't it depend, though, on what our goals are? For example, you could fit my brain into a thimble, yet I see this as an opportunity, as you suggested in the note you sent earlier, to de-escalate this crisis. Why would we not?
Because American politics have become so politicized. Watch Fox News or watch CNN and listen to pick a Republican or pick a Democrat. There's no sense of compromise. I mean, look, what Donald Trump did in taking out Soleimani was either bold or reckless. But we come at it with a partisan view, and the real questions, which I think are genuine, was this imminent? The Iraqi prime minister said that Soleimani was en route to discuss a negotiation with Saudi Arabia. Whether that's true or not, nobody knows. But the politicization of America, going back to Vietnam, has made rational thought exceedingly difficult. And so any president has to overcome this. We will see how this ends up, but my guess is that Trump will declare a victory and then I hope have some kind of olive branch or some kind of diplomatic initiative that he's going to reach out. But this is only transitory. The question is, what next? So even if this crisis is now behind us, and I suspect it will be, though one can be surprised, then where do we go from here? Your point about aims and objectives. It is clear Iraq and Iran, or I should say Iran, wants America out of the region. So does Donald Trump. Is there grounds for some kind of negotiation? Now, on the other hand, and I don't think this is going to happen, but the wild card is Trump could listen to Lindsey Graham and say, enough is enough. I've got the Iranians on their back feet. I'm going to launch a massive strike against them with the expectation that this is going to cause a regime change. I think that would be catastrophic. I think it would be explosive in the extreme. I don't completely rule that out, though. I think it's on a scale of 1 to 100, it's down in the single figure digits. But we'll see. My best guess, Trump will declare a victory here, which he's entitled to do, and I hope this will lay the grounds for some kind of a strategy. But so far, administrations, and I'm not using just Trump, administrations use aspirations and intentions as strategic surrogates, not a strategy. A strategy has to set ends and means and ways to get there within achievable resources. And quite frankly, administrations going back to Vietnam have been not very good at doing that.
Frightening thoughts. Now, a couple of things. Will the streets of Iran, which are boiling right now, will they be satisfied with this somewhat tepid response by their leadership?
Yes, because the leadership will make it so. The leadership has control. Certainly Friday prayers, which come obviously later this week, we'll talk about a great Iranian victory. I think this will be seen sufficient to calm public unrest simply because the Ayatollahs have sufficient control. We'll see, but I don't believe there's going to be any kind of backlash. The key questions are what's next? Does this give the Americans the opportunity to have some kind of a measured withdrawal from Iraq, which I think is everybody's interest? And what next in terms of dealing with Iran? It seems to me that we really want to get the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action back on the table. My guess is that the Trump administration probably could negotiate something, and even though it probably will not be significantly better than the JCPOA, as they have done with North Korea, they can claim a great victory and move on to other issues. But we'll see. This is also going to be relevant for the presidential election because the president can claim, as I said, great success. If he were wise, he could use the example of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which in fact we started and in fact led to an extension of the Cold War. But to almost every American, the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1961 was a great, 1962 was a great success and great victory for Jack Kennedy. And I think in this case, Trump could use the phrase, not that the Soviet Union blinked as it did in 1962, but I think Tehran blinked. And he could make this a very, very great PR success for him if the people around him are clever enough to make that happen.
Now, one of the things, if Iran has its streets, America has Israel. Now, Netanyahu probably would press for regime change if he could. The president has already made very clear in his opening statement after the assassination that he was not seeking regime change. So this tends to favor your point of view, but will Netanyahu push him?
I think as far as Trump is concerned, Netanyahu is expendable. And if Netanyahu, who's going to be indicted or has been indicted, cannot get immunity from the parliament, as a politician, his goose is cooked if he can't win the election.
Mm-hmm.
And even if he does, he's liable to stand trial. So I think that Trump is a very transactional guy, and what have you done for me lately? And he's not going to do anything necessarily that is going to be useful to Netanyahu. It doesn't serve his purposes. And if he wants to do a deal with Iran, and Netanyahu is opposed to that, as we say in Russian, "До свидания, Mr. Netanyahu."
My guest is Harlan Ullman, now blessing us with his Russian as well. Harlan, while this has been on the front page, on page 3, that's really just a metaphor, or 5, is the fact that President Vladimir Putin visited Syria yesterday. What about that? He met with Assad. I'm thinking about Syria, the Russians, the Turks, the Kurds. What's the latest on that front?
The winner and champion, Vladimir Putin.
Mm-hmm.
The Russians will come out best, and in fact, I would bet a great deal of money that Putin will see if he can be the intermediary between America and Iran. He gets along very well with Trump. I think Trump trusts Putin. I don't see anything wrong with that. I wouldn't trust Putin. I would have certainly some cautions there, but this is in everyone's interest. So if I were Trump, maybe having Vladimir as my intermediary makes a great deal of sense. So there's an opportunity for win-win-win situations, except for the long term. I think the die is cast. The Americans have got to de-escalate. We have to reduce our presence out there. I think we've made a point, and now I think it's time for serious diplomacy so that the Iranians get on with what they're doing and we get on with what we're doing. And as I said, I think the big winner in terms of influence will be the Russians. But if the Russians want to get stuck in Syria and get bogged down in these quagmires, I think a common sense argument is let's let them do that.
But now let me go there, because if we leave the Middle East, doesn't it?
No, we're not going to leave. No. We're not going to leave the Middle East. That's absurd.
No, but de-escalate, if you will.
Sure.
But here's my point, and not that it would be a bad thing. That's up for others to decide. But clearly, Iran, less so than perhaps wanted the end of Israel, wants hegemony in Persia and in those countries to its west. Wouldn't we be surrendering their influence?
Absolutely not. We've shown to the world that Iran is a lot weaker than we had thought, because we should have known better in the first place. We're not going to withdraw our troops from Bahrain, and we're still going to keep lots of troops in Qatar and Doha, and in the UAE, and some in Saudi Arabia. I'm talking about reducing our presence in Iraq possibly to 1,000 trainers and self-protection forces. I don't think we can entirely get out, but at least we can give the impression that we're reducing. We've got 40,000 people in the region. Similarly with Afghanistan. I think Trump was quite right, as Obama was, to try to withdraw, but we have to withdraw from a position of strength, and I think that the assassination of Soleimani, if played properly, may, and I say may, give us that leverage. But this is going to require careful diplomacy, and as I said earlier, Bob, I'm just very, very suspect for any White House to be able to engage in this delicate diplomacy, given the nature of our political system and leaks everywhere, and the politicization that no matter what you do, the other side is going to take issue with it.
Harlan Ullman is our guest, internationally renowned national security expert. We're, of course, talking about the crisis with Iran and the United States. I'm just fascinated by all this. Now, between yesterday and today, not that you have changed your position, but you seem a little more optimistic about this crisis ending. Was it the fact of their tepid response, or do you know things that we don't know?
No, the response that Iran made could not be weaker. And so one was very concerned. My estimation was that Iran was going to be far more clever and was going to use its proxy forces to attack American installations in Iraq, as they had done about the embassy, with the intention of driving the Americans out. Instead, with this attack of 15 ballistic missiles, and one of the lessons we should have learned is that maybe Iran has greater military capability than we thought, because it was risky supposing those missiles went astray and killed somebody. So they may have better capability than we thought, which is a positive thing, meaning that they can control escalation. The other issue that has not been raised was, I thought America had all these great defenses. And did we not have sufficient warning time to be able to take any of our anti-air capability to attack these things? Or did we simply lack ballistic missiles in Iraq to deal with this particular attack? That's a secondary issue. But the big difference today, Bob, is the fact that the Iranians, other than sending a messenger to the White House to say, Mr. Trump, disregard our attack, this is just a ploy, this is just a show, they've done everything in their power to minimize the implications, which leads to the conclusion that this was done for entirely domestic consumption, and that Iran is really looking for an opportunity to have some kind of negotiation. And if Trump were smart, he would then claim that this maximum pressure campaign is really working, and now rather than necessarily continue it and amp it up, we will offer the possibility of a negotiation with Iran.
The great, though miserably immoral Nathan Bedford Forrest, the Civil War general, once said for the South, keep up the scare, keep pursuing. Will not generals push the president to do that at number one? And number two, and this troubles me, had you been advising the Iranians, would you not have asked them to do something a little stronger so that the United States wouldn't be tempted in that way?
Oh, yeah, I would have been far more diabolical. I would have done a lot of things getting into cyber. I would have hinted against attacks against the Saudi oil facilities. I would have used a great deal of disinformation by saying that American ambassadors, beware. I would have used the internet to launch a whole campaign of propaganda, so forth, to try to frighten the Americans. But one has to understand that Iran is probably more pragmatic than we are. So we need to exploit this. Now, as I said, the one risk is that there are people such as Lindsey Graham and Mike Pompeo, and probably Giuliani, who are close to the president, who will say, look, this is the opportunity for regime change. This was John Bolton's position. And I certainly hope that the president does not succumb to these Looney Tune ideas.
And Looney Tune ideas they are. I thought I hit the wrong button. You'll forgive me. You mentioned, one more item before I go there. The Turks, they've been somewhat quiet. What's going on with the Turks and the Kurds, and is Russia helping in any way moderate that?
No, not at all. But what's even more interesting is that, as you know, the Turks are going into Tripoli to help the government, whereas the Russians are supporting the Hatter rebels in the other part of Libya. So there's a further tension between Russia and Turkey. I think that that's all manageable because Russia and Turkey both understand that they have common interests, even when they divide on some points. And Putin likes the idea of selling S-400s, which bring money in, but also divide the NATO alliance. And so while there are going to be differences, I think the Turks have been able to get along with these ambiguities and differences with Russia. But make no mistake, they are both key players, and they're going to try and expand their mutual influence.
Fascinating stuff. 927. You mentioned something that I have to go back to because I was 11 years old, and it is the most terrified I have ever been, the Cuban Missile Crisis. You said we brought that on. Did we bring that on by trying to take out Castro? Did we bring that on by putting missiles in Turkey? How did we bring that on?
Very simply, the Kennedy administration, when it was running for office, was running to the right of Dwight Eisenhower and Richard Nixon. It claimed the missile gap, and indeed there was a huge missile gap, but the missile gap was entirely in our favor. And when the administration came into office, it had 3 defense supplementals. It changed the strategy from massive retaliation to flexible response and decided we were going to go from whatever our nuclear deterrent was to something like 10,000 warheads. And so here are the Russians, who in 1961 under Khrushchev had made the decision that they were going to reduce military spending because they thought they could do a deal with the United States. And so as they were reducing military spending, in comes Kennedy. He then launches the Bay of Pigs, which was the failed invasion of Cuba in April of 1961. Then he goes to Vienna to meet Khrushchev, where Khrushchev just pounds him into dust. Mm-hmm. Anyway, back in Moscow, Khrushchev is being attacked by the military, saying, "What do you think you're doing? The Americans are building up, we're building down." And Khrushchev was building down because he wanted to reform. He wanted to put more money in the Russian economy, in the public sector, not in defense. And so his alternative was, all right, the Americans have got Jupiter missiles in Turkey. We're going to put missiles in Cuba. I met Kennedy. He's going to back down. If I put missiles in Cuba, I don't have to spend more money in defense. And so that's what happened. And the fact is that we could not tolerate missiles in Cuba, which were there because we started an arms race that was unnecessary, and the Cold War was probably extended by a decade.
Wow. Okay. Something about the Bay of Pigs has always mystified me. Now, you teach at war colleges, so maybe you can clear this up for me. If you're going to do that kind of an invasion, it was done half-heartedly, and then he didn't put in air support. Why do that half-heartedly? I mean, clearly, people blame Kennedy for that, but even its conception, what was flawed about that whole operation?
Well, you have to realize, first of all, Eisenhower had a temper, and Eisenhower had supposedly approved the plan. You had the anti-communist, you had the Dulles brothers, John Foster, Secretary of State, and Allen at CIA, who wanted to take on the Soviet Union and take on communism. And so you had a lot of these crazy plans, and it wasn't just the Bay of Pigs. You know, we tried to assassinate Castro. We did a lot of these really loopy things. And I think in part, while Eisenhower probably had misgivings, I think he was prepared to put this hand grenade in Jack Kennedy's lap and let Kennedy pull the pin no matter what happened. So I suspect there was a degree of animosity on the part of Eisenhower. But this thing was crazy. There was no way that the Cuban people were going to rise up against Castro because they hated the previous government, which had been terribly repressive. You can't land with 1,500 Cuban emigres without any real military capacity and being supported by a handful of B-26s, which were not very, very capable aircraft. So, you know, this was the inexperience, the lack of knowledge and understanding on the part of a brand new administration who thought that they were the best and the brightest. And they weren't. And if you didn't like the Bay of Pigs, you certainly wouldn't have liked Vietnam. And yet we did the same thing in Vietnam.
What's your assessment of I have mixed feelings about Johnson. He went wholeheartedly with the Civil Rights Act and and of course the war on poverty, but he allowed hubris to keep him in Vietnam. How might that have ended better had he taken a different view?
On balance, I think Lyndon Johnson could have been one of our greatest presidents. I mean, he's an enormous enigma. He was a guy who grew up in Texas. He was a school teacher, as you may remember, and was very, very concerned about how minorities were being treated. And how he came to that conclusion, I guess, was probably in the classroom. But what he did domestically was brilliant. He was a great leader of the Senate, but he was intimidated, not only intimidated, but very jealous of the Kennedys. And I think when Jack was assassinated and Lyndon was inaugurated as president, he felt inferior to the Kennedys because of their alleged superiority, their Harvard background, so forth, and was trapped by them because, as you know, he kept the Kennedy team. He kept McNamara, he kept Mac Bundy as his national security advisor,
yes.
so forth. And so we as Americans believe we were prepared to pay any price, bear any burden. We really believe this nonsense about if we don't stop the commies on the Mekong, we're going to fight them on the Mississippi. And by the time Johnson realized this was a mistake, and this is very much like George W. Bush realizing that Iraq was a mistake, Bush came to his senses, fired Rumsfeld, put in the surge and did different things to try to turn things around. Johnson was just incapable of doing that, and I think by 1967, psychologically, he felt so defeated and demoralized that there was nothing he could do, and the war finally killed him. But I just think by the time he realized that something had to be done, he didn't know what to do. And that was the further tragedy.
Let's get into another president if you have the time. I mean, I know we're going far afield of what's going on overseas, but what's past is prologue, as you well know. Someone asked me today about who the most qualified people were to be president in my lifetime, and as you would expect, I didn't have a handful. I felt that George H.W. Bush. I thought Richard Nixon. However,
Absolutely.
He was flawed, and I still, after Richard Nixon, I thought it was right to impeach him, and I despised some of the people that worked for him. But I still would hang on every word after he sort of came back into the public eye. He wrote books, he gave speeches.
Yep.
They were phenomenally insightful. What about him?
Well, I think since World War II, since Truman, I mean, what's interesting about Truman was that Truman was probably the most knowledgeable president about all his predecessors. He could tell you virtually anything you wanted to know about the prior, whatever it was, 30 presidents, even though that his background wasn't such that you would think that he was necessarily that qualified.
No, he didn't go to college.
Eisenhower, it would be hard to find somebody, even though Eisenhower did not have what seems to be a lot of domestic experience. He did work for about 7 or 8 years for MacArthur, which probably gave him a certain political feel. Then you had Nixon, who was enormously qualified. Kennedy was not. Johnson was, except Johnson was in a position that was intolerable because of Vietnam. Then Nixon, of course, was elected. And since then, I mean, Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter was certainly not ready. Ronald Reagan wasn't certainly ready, even though he was governor of California for 2 terms and president of the Screen Actors Guild, which gave him some kind of background. Then you had George H.W. Bush, who was, and that was it. The rest, Bill Clinton wasn't.
Do you know what's
Barack
fascinating?
Obama and George H.W. Bush aren't, and Donald Trump is the least qualified, in my judgment, of the presidents we've had.
Do you know who was, for me, fascinating in a lot of ways? Ronald Reagan, while a lot of people didn't like how far to the right he was and how he kept his hands off things, but again, having lived through Vietnam, having lived through Watergate, there was a period in time, not that I loved my country, but I would grow suspicious of people who put American flag pins because the country had been so polarized. And he made us feel, even when you didn't agree with him, like one again. That was one thing that I loved about the guy. Why is no one capable of doing that anymore?
Well, it's rather like Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was the most charismatic president we had. You looked at him, I mean, just the way he handled himself, his sense of humor. And that is on an individual basis. And the same thing with Reagan. Reagan was unbelievably disarming. He was charming. You looked at him, and people genuinely liked him. If Reagan was not so liked, he would have been impeached and convicted over Iran-Contra.
Over Iran-Contra, yes, absolutely.
But everybody liked Reagan, and he was disarming. For example, he was asked, well, how did you feel to be on the stage with John Kennedy or whomever? Was that not intimidating? Yeah. And he said, you never were in a movie with John Wayne. I mean,
that's a great answer.
It's not only a great answer, it's a brilliant answer.
Yeah, my goodness.
And Reagan was able to do that, to bring it down to a personal level. And, the definition of brilliance is when you hear something, you should say, I wish I had said that, or I wish I had thought about that. And so Reagan was able to do that, and he had great charm. And And when he was being asked questions that were really very, very difficult or offensive, he would just smile and point to his ear as if he couldn't hear.
Mm-hmm.
And so he treated people with great dignity. He treated the Oval Office with great dignity, and he had some really good people around him,
Mm-hmm.
namely Jim Baker. So that really helped the Reagan presidency, even though I think that he was not as good a president in reality as he was in terms of how people viewed him, but perceptions count.
Perceptions do count, and he made you feel good to be American. If I can go back to just Nixon a little bit, where was he flawed? Was he flawed by his paranoia? Was he like Johnson? Was Watergate just a fly in his ointment that just drove him askew? What went wrong there?
No. Richard Nixon had a huge inferiority complex. Remember, his parents, he was a Quaker.
Mm-hmm.
And, Nixon never really made the football team. He didn't get to Harvard. Even though he was enormously bright, he was always a second stringer. And he was very, very jealous, but seemed very, very inferior to the Kennedys. So he had this complex, in essence, a chip on his shoulder. And despite the fact that he had a brilliant political mind and was extremely able, he was also raised in the rough and tumble politics. Remember when he was running for Senate against Helen Gurley,
Mm-hmm.
And he assaulted her as the Red Lady. And so politics, as far as he was concerned, was always dirty. He always had the dirty trip shop. And that they were breaking into the Democratic Party headquarters really was nothing new. They had done things rather like that on both sides.
Yeah, that's right.
And so he felt that this was trivial. He felt that he was loyal to his people. Nobody was going to find out. And I think he made a small mistake that just blew up. This was politics as usual. You had what was his name, Segretti?
Yeah, I was just going to say Donald Segretti. Donald Segretti was his dirty tricks guy.
Of course, who would fabricate stories and forge letters and so forth to embarrass other people. This was the nature of politics. And don't forget, how did Nixon lose the 1960 election? He lost it in West Virginia and in Chicago when those votes were bought.
Mm-hmm.
There's no doubt that election was rigged. And Nixon had the character to say, I'm not going to create a national crisis over this. So this was the background of politics. And so when Watergate blew up, the Democrats or the Republicans were going after stuff on Ted Kennedy, who Nixon was afraid of running against because he had this paranoia about the Kennedys.
Mm-hmm.
This was almost business as usual. And the issue about money, so forth, it was true on both sides. So, in a sense, Nixon was felled by making a small mistake, which turned out to be a catastrophic one.
You know what I always felt was almost Shakespearean, and again, we're talking with Harlan Ullman, and we've gone off this crisis into the current crisis, into some history that is fascinating with this knowledgeable man. I always thought it was a tactical mistake for Haldeman and Ehrlichman, and indeed the president, to make John Dean the scapegoat, because he turned out to be like some Shakespearean character. The guy had a memory and recall, and he turned it around on all of them. Wouldn't it have been better off to take him into the fold in some way rather than make him the scapegoat, or is that just the nature of that kind of politics?
I don't think he was a scapegoat. I have no regard for John Dean. John Dean ratted on the president to save his own skin. And
yes,
there was nothing that the White House could do. So he was put in a position where was he going to go to jail forever, or was he going to tell the truth? Under those circumstances, everybody would have told the truth. So this notion of resurrecting John Dean as somehow this hero of Watergate seems to me to reverse the actual history. He came clean, but the reason he came clean was he had no alternative.
Well, of course. But what about the fact that Haldeman and Ehrlichman, trying to save their skin, put Dean in that position?
No, I don't think they did. I think they all were in a similar position. I think there was, to some degree, a lack of complete knowledge and understanding of what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
Things were compartmentalized. And quite frankly, in any White House, everybody is staffed to save the president. So everybody is expendable as long as the president is protected. And that's true of anybody. from Richard Nixon to Donald Trump.
Okay, having said that, this is interesting stuff because let's now skip 30 years later or 30 years plus later when Dick Cheney is trying to save Scooter Libby, and in that same, if you will, environment or context that you're explaining, he wanted the president, quote, to save someone we left on the battlefield. Should the president have saved that guy?
Yeah, I think Scooter was. I know Scooter. I think Scooter was put in an impossible position. Remember, Valerie Plum's claims, not undercover title, was accidentally leaked by Rich Armitage, the Deputy Secretary of Defense,
who worked for our boy,
who worked for Colin Powell. I mean, this is a mistake. Rich just was talking to I forget whoever the Novak or Evans or whomever the reporter was.
It was Bob Novak.
And this came out. And so Scooter took the fall to protect the vice president. And it seems to me that in this regard, I think that he should have been exonerated. But
I tell you, this is fascinating stuff, and I'll tell you why. This even goes beyond politics. I grew up in an environment where you didn't rat on your friends. If you did something together, it was all for one and one for all. It's a sport thing. It's a thing in the Army. And the question does become, in politics, should we adhere to that even if laws are broken? It's in the military, I don't know how it exists because you also have the code of honor. But you certainly would have, and you think the president should have saved Scooter Libby. Why do you think he did? I mean, later on he gave him a modified kind of pardon, but
well, he did. What he did was he forewent the jail time, but kept the fine.
Yes.
So it was it was not a full pardon.
Why do you think he did that?
Because I think he was fed up with Dick Cheney.
I agree with that.
I think that Cheney had been such a bad vice president for Bush that at that stage I don't even think that they were talking to each other, and so there was nothing that Bush was going to do to help Cheney, even at Scooter Libby's expense.
All right, I want to go down one other path before I let you go. It's 9:44. We are talking with the very knowledgeable. We could do this all day if we wanted to. Harlan Ullman about presidents. Let's go to generals a little bit. You know them all. You know them well, and those that were a little before your time and historic.
Well, past tense.
Right. Yes. Those you. MacArthur was a great general. Where did he go wrong?
Let me count the ways. His ego was such that he became infallible. When you take a look at MacArthur, he was an incredibly brave soldier. I mean, incredibly brave. But his finest hour was in the occupation of Japan, when he put Japan on the right track towards democracy, and for that, he deserves a very, very notable place in history. But during the Korean War, after the Incheon invasion, as you recall, the North Koreans streamed south on June 25th, 1950, pushed us down to the heel of Korea around the Pusan perimeter, and in desperation, with the left flank, MacArthur sent the Army and the Marine Corps up just south of Seoul to Incheon, just south of the DMZ, the 38th parallel, in an amphibious operation where the conditions, because the rise and fall of the tide was about 30 feet, that seemed impossible. And so this was a huge, huge success. Now, ironically, he could have landed 20 miles south where there was absolutely no risk of tides and had the same effect. But I think MacArthur wanted to make this look like the greatest operation in history against all sorts of obstacles. And as we routed the North Korean army and moved north at a rapid rate, MacArthur was determined to get to the Yalu River when the Joint Chiefs of Staff were saying, slow down, slow down. But because MacArthur was MacArthur and was seen as the great mastermind, he was more powerful than the Joint Chiefs. And he was told repeatedly that the Chinese were coming in. He refused to believe that. Just before Thanksgiving of 1950, the Chinese attacked in large numbers, withdrew, attacked, withdrew, attacked, and withdrew. And still MacArthur did not believe that the Chinese were coming in. Then on Thanksgiving, 1 million Chinese or so forth headed south, and that's what happened. And so the issue here was MacArthur probably was too old, but he was too arrogant and too certain in his ways. And so as a result, the Korean War was at best a draw, and had he stopped at the neck of North Korea, south of Pyongyang, there probably could have been some agreement, and we wouldn't be having the problems with North Korea today. But when you get somebody who believes that he's smarter than Caesar and is not controllable, and it took a long time for Truman to fire him simply because of his popularity, that's a problem.
Okay, let's go to Ike. Now, we know what kind of a president he was. Pretty decent president, although, as you said, he had a temper, which may have hurt him. And certainly he hurt the Cuban situation. What about Ike, though? He seemed to be a great organizer and a cool head, no?
Well, I think that his greatness really was in World War II because of his personality.
Yes.
You can't say that Eisenhower was a great general in the sense that generals fight battles in wars, because Eisenhower had virtually no combat experience, which was an issue. But how he was able to work with personalities to include FDR, George Marshall, Winston Churchill, and Stalin was remarkable. And so that it was a combination of his personality and his will and his political ability to deal with different people that distinguished him as a brilliant World War II general in terms of organizing and leading the Allies in Europe.
Okay.
Now, as president, I think Ike had a mixed record. And I think for part of the reasons he had a mixed record, he was in ill health. He had several heart attacks, certainly in his first term. And I think that had impaired him, but there's not necessarily any kind of evidence to that effect. I also have great reservations about John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles, because I think they helped to perpetuate the Cold War with this notion of anti-communism, because I actually think that Eisenhower knew that he could do a deal with the Soviets, except that he never really had the opportunity to do that deal, in large part because Gary Francis Powers got shot down in whatever it was, May 1960 in his U-2. Eisenhower initially lied about it because he had no other choice, and that made it him. He was supposed to have a major summit with Khrushchev in St. Petersburg in June of 1960. That, of course, was canceled, and so who knows how the world could have taken another path had Powers not been shot down.
Okay, real mixed record here. I'm not qualified to judge, except he appeared to be a bold-faced liar, but that's depending on who you believe. William Westmoreland. Did he get a bum rap?
Westy was a good-looking colonel who should never have been a general.
Wow.
How can I put it more bluntly?
Okay, I got it. He was good for television. Now, I've been unfair to this guy, or maybe not, but I always felt that the first Iraq War was a great victory for people who do logistics. Just incredible. But that's, again, you're talking to a guy who's a real pedestrian here. But
You're absolutely right.
But Westmoreland trumped around like he was the second coming of Napoleon. Was he overrated?
Westmoreland, we just went through that.
No, I'm sorry, Schwarzkopf. My mouth took liberties. General Schwarzkopf is who I meant.
Yeah, I look. Schwarzkopf won a Silver Star in Vietnam as a brigadier general when his battalion was trapped in a minefield, and so Norm had great courage. But Norm liked to rule by intimidation, and I knew all those generals really quite well. Certainly, the 3 stars who were commanded the air war, the naval war, and the land war. And I think Schwarzkopf was too intimidating. Colin Powell had 2 worries, and he writes about that in his book, whether the Iraqis were going to use weapons of mass destruction, namely poison gas, and whether Norm was going to come unglued. And in part of his book, Colin's book, My American Journey,
yeah, I read it.
He talks about a conversation he's having with General Schwarzkopf, in which Schwarzkopf says something, my head is blowing up, or words to that effect. And Powell had already picked out General Butch Saint, who was a commander in Europe, as a potential replacement. So I think that the real credit goes to General Powell, who oversaw this, and quite frankly, in terms of the first Iraq War, it didn't make any difference who was in command because we had such overwhelming advantages, and quite frankly, the operational commanders all had experience in Vietnam, and they were anxious to restore the reputation. Freddie Franks, the commander of 7 Corps and the Great Left Hook, had won a Silver Star, lost a leg in Vietnam. Chuck Horner, the Air War commander, had won a Silver Star in Vietnam. These were all highly experienced combat commanders. And, you know, we had 147 people killed in that campaign, a third of which were killed in a Scud attack by accident. So in terms of military campaigns, you'd be hard-pressed to find, you know, maybe when Santa Anna got killed or was defeated after the Alamo in a 30-second or 31-minute battle, you'd be hard-pressed to find any sort of one-sided military victory that was greater than this one.
Colin Powell, as a general, I thought he was a good Secretary of State, a good Joint Chief leader. I wished he'd run for president. How do you rate him among generals, though?
Colin Powell is one of my closest friends, so I'm biased. He had an instinct for the Army that goes back to his time in NROTC at CCNY. He just had an instinct, and General Grant had an instinct. And so the great strength of General Powell is when he came up with his base force approach. In other words, the Cold War was over. How do you downsize the military? And how he was able to work the Pentagon was brilliant, because none of the services really wanted to cut their forces, and how he did it. Remember, he was very, very young as chairman. He was one of our youngest chairmen.
Yeah.
In terms of orchestrating the Gulf War, there were a lot of uncertainties, and quite frankly, any war plan we had, we were going to win. But this is one of the most one-sided military victories in history. And so you have to equate Powell as one of our great generals, even though he didn't serve in the highest command in World War II or during Vietnam, during one of the more important campaigns. So it was impossible to know how well he would have done. But I think he would have done brilliantly at any time in our history. But that's not provable.
One question about Powell, actually his relationship with Cheney, which cooled when he was Secretary of State. Now, he and Cheney took many victory laps together, and rightfully so, after the first Gulf War. Why did they split?
Well, if you go back to Powell's book, My American Journey, as Secretary of Defense and as when Powell was chairman, he and Cheney, I think, had a good professional relationship.
Yeah, they did.
But a non-existent personal relationship. And when Bush was defeated after the election in January of January 1993, when the Clinton administration came in, Colin went up to Cheney's office on the third deck of the Pentagon to say goodbye, and Cheney had left without saying anything to Powell. So I think that pretty clearly states that they had a good a good professional relationship, and not much of a personal one.
I tell you, this is so exciting for me and great to have this conversation. I want to ask you about one more guy, and then we'll ask you to sum up where we go next. And we're going to go to the Air Force. Maxwell Taylor, all kinds of stories about him. A war hawk, but started SAC. What's the real story with Maxwell Taylor?
Max Taylor is I used to know Taylor pretty well. When I was teaching at the War College, I brought in a lot of the then surviving World War II heroes. He was in command of the 101st, with the 82nd, I forget which, at Bastogne, but actually he had been brought back to America during the Battle of the Bulge. Taylor was a gifted general during World War II. He wrote a book that argued for flexible response, and his view was that we had to be able to take on the Soviets at every level, from unconventional warfare to nuclear warfare, which the Kennedy administration readily adopted, which was a huge mistake. And so I think you had somebody who was very, very able, who was a professional military officer, highest standard, but whose ultimate strategic judgment, while understandable at the times, was proven to be to fall short.
Flawed.
Even though he was a distinguished fellow, he was a fascinating guy to be around. He told me stories. In the interwar years, he was living at Fort McNair, where the National War College was, as a first lieutenant or a captain, because promotion was really slow. But in those days, the Army was part of the social elite. So even though they were very, very junior officers, they palled around with members of Congress and the so-called elite in Washington. And I asked Taylor, well, why did you stay in the military? And he said, of my generation, we knew after World War I something was going to happen. And so you had these professionals like Eisenhower and Patton and Bradley and so forth, because during the interwar years from 1918 until 1941, being in the military was not much fun. You didn't have any money. There were no real lots of money being provided for troops, and the military was brought down to bare numbers. And I had a lot of admiration, and I had a lot of time for Taylor, but I just think that in history, looking backwards, his strategic judgment was somewhat flawed.
Interesting. You know, this has just been wonderful. I could go on and on and on. You're a gift to the airwaves and just my own interest, and I hope the listeners got as much out of it as I did. Before you leave, what is your final comment on the crisis with Iran? Where do you think we're headed?
Well, I would say with at least 80% certainty, but 20% is a big number. The president will say that we have scored a great victory. Iran has blinked, or words to that effect, and that because we've taken out Soleimani, we now have an opportunity with Iran to progress and to be able to achieve the things that I want, a new nuclear agreement, and restraining Iran's benign, or I should say belligerent activities in the region. But we will see. Trump is capable of saying anything, and whereas I hope this is not the case, and it would be somewhat surprising, he could say that we're going to have an all-out attack against Iran, maximum pressure, and we want a regime change. I think that's extraordinarily unlikely. I think it's reckless and dangerous and could be catastrophic. But with this president, being predictable is very difficult.
One never knows. You're absolutely right. Harlan Ullman, thank you so very much. You know what I'm going to say for the next time we talk? Was Dulles and the people that ran the CIA really that problematic back in the 60s? But we'll save that for another day. Thank you so very much. You have a wonderful day. Keep us informed. If things change, we'll get a hold of you. Harlan Ullman, everybody, thank you so much. All righty, we've got a lot of people to thank. Of course, Harlan Ullman, Ivar Hayden, A.J. Woodson. We got to get Al Tarantino back on tomorrow. The Harvard professor and Dr. Deepak Bhatt, Guy Fessenden from Choice, Vince Russo, Anthony the Caller, and of course, our own Jake Schaefer, who probably has heard from his family and now have a fatwa out about me. We'll be talking with Jake again tomorrow. We have a lot more. And don't forget, Friday, he will have Jake's Picks of the Week. Now, Jake's Picks of the Week are brought to one of the sponsors we want to thank right now. Dominic's Fine Cigars, licensed retailer with a big selection, including Arturo Fuente, Patrons, and more. Dominic's Fine Cigars, located at 204 Boston Post Road in Larchmont. They're open 7 days. Of course, the United Hebrew of New Rochelle, a top-rated campus of senior care. Visit uhdc.com. They also brought you the exclusive weather. Now, remember, they were voted one of America's best rehabilitation and senior care campuses, and it's right here in New Rochelle. Visit uhdc.com. Aging Issues Management, Aging Issues Radio. They'll be on tonight on the air at 6 o'clock. The law firm of Payne & Kahn, and plug-in virtual reality. I'm Bob Marrone. We'll see you all tomorrow. Thursday's a big day. Don't forget, Andy Spano will be weighing in on all of these items, including the new bail law. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow.